What if the Cullens attended Hogwarts? Part 6. BPOV. Deck the halls with boughs of holly. Fa la 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 la. 'Tis the season to be jolly. Fa la 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 la. I groaned loudly against the mattress as the song went into its third repeat, stuffing my pillow over my head to block out the lyrics. They must have heard the muffled thud as the fabric hit my head, because, maddeningly, they suddenly increased their volume, practically shouting out the words, though still managing to retain the beautiful bell-like quality to their voices. See the blazing Yule before us. Fa la 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 la. Strike the harp and join the chorus. Fa la 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 la. Not giving in, I muttered stubbornly, squeezing my eyes tighter shut. My window slid open not a second later, the volume of their chanting increasing further still as they surrounded my bed, only a few feet away now. Follow me in merry measure. Fa la 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 la. While I tell of, all right, I screamed, launching a pillow at Emmett's head. He easily snatched it out of the air, breaking into booming laughter at my outburst. You finally going to get up? He asked. Finally. I thrust a finger at the clock on my bedside table. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. I hadn't planned on getting up for another hour and a half at least. Not one of the four invading Cullens looked even the slightest bit remorseful. Their determination was written into their stances as they gazed down upon me, arms folded stubbornly, legs apart. Well, I am sorry, Alice chirped, taking a step forward, but that really doesn't work for us. Edward, Carlisle, and Esme refused to let us open presents without you, so get up and get dressed. Jasper flashed a mischievous grin. Or we'll carry you there in your PJs. Alice held her tongue. I would have thought she'd have argued at the preposterous idea of me entering the Cullen mansion in my holy sweats. Wow, she must really be impatient for her gifts. I flopped back down onto the bed out of sheer irritation. All this for presents. Bah, Bella, Alice said, a warning in her tone. Oh, relax, would you? I am getting up. My best friend clapped her hands together, and bounced on the spot. Okay, said Rosalie, excited now too as she pushed her husband back towards my window. We'll see you in about half an hour then. Don't take any longer than that. Alice and Jasper followed after the pair, hopping silently out of the room. Before they disappeared back to their house, Emmett's deep velvety voice carried up through the air, every musical note injected with festive cheer. Merry Christmas, Scrooge. My eyes narrowed automatically. Humbug. His booming laughter echoed back, before inevitably fading away into the distance. With a sigh, and muttering something about mangy, blood-sucking degenerates, I crawled my way out of bed, grabbing my toiletry bag, before heading off to the bathroom to clean myself up. My hair was a haystack, but it was nothing that a little magic couldn't fix. I quickly splashed icy water onto my face, which went some way in helping to wake me properly. Once I'd seen to the tangled chaos framing my face, I hurried back to my room to change. Alice, predictably, had left an outfit hanging from my wardrobe door, so her silence following Jazz's pajama threat had definitely been a bluff. I hadn't noticed the black zip-down bag before. Attached to it was a note. Bella, jeans and a t-shirt do not count as appropriate attire for Christmas Day. Here's your outfit. You already have shoes to match. I know you'll understand. Thinking it best to simply get the horror over with, I tugged down the zip with one swift pull. An inevitable, menacing hiss ensued as a mass of shiny red taffeta spilled out. The dress was extravagant, the smooth strapless bodice bubbling out just above the waist, into a full skirt which cut off an inch or so from the knee. Around the waistline, there was a thick ribbon, which tied into a large bow at the back. My pixie friend, realizing that not all dresses came with a hidden pocket, had made me a belt to go under my clothes, from which dangled a tiny spherical pouch. Resigned, though far from happy, I tied the thing around my waist, slipping the Newton ball into the bag, before changing into the outfit. Then, of course, there was the matter of footwear. I knew precisely which shoes Alice had been referring to, the ones she'd bought me for my birthday. The ones that changed color to synchronize with the rest of a person's clothes. The ones with the 6-inch heel. Alice, I hissed again. Despite my indignation, however, I did as I was expected to, simply to avoid an earful later. The second the death traps were on, the material turned from black to a vivid scarlet. My stomach dropped as I checked myself in the mirror. How was it that I felt plainer now that I was clothed in such luxurious fabric? Despite the paradox, it was the truth. It didn't seem right that the dress should have to put up with someone as unexceptional as me. If it had had a mouth like the Sorting Hat, it probably would have complained. Suppose I should make some effort, I muttered to myself, utterly self-conscious. It was Christmas Day after all. And so, completely out of character, I actually did the whole hair and cosmetics thing, though I kept it light, just a bit of mascara, a very thin layer of natural rose lipstick, and big loose curls. It didn't take long, a minute at the most, to magically make myself over. Charlie was already dressed when I entered the kitchen, sat at the table sipping coffee. I examined his casual attire with mild jealousy. Why was he allowed to wear jeans and a t-shirt when I had to wear this? Oh, yeah, because he'd already promised to have Christmas dinner with Billy and Jake. I bit my lip as I wondered whether I should contact my shape-shifting friend at some point during the holidays, or would that be wrong? Should I just leave him to get on with his life, even though I actually wanted to see him? Would he prefer it that way? Was it the right and more considerate thing to do? A sudden cough from Charlie pulled me back from my deliberations. "Wow, Bells," he said, taking in my dress, "you look good." "I look like a Christmas bauble," I complained moodily, earning a confused look from my dad as I dropped 2 slices of bread into the toaster. "Alice dropped it off this morning. You know how she likes to make me up." He nodded, chuckling into his mug. "Ah, yeah, I heard the singing. They an impatient bunch, aren't they?" That's an understatement. Though I was still annoyed with the Cullens siblings for forcing me out of bed at an ungodly hour, I was intensely grateful that Charlie had accepted their odd quirks. He didn't even seem to care that they jumped into my room and had tortured me into wakefulness. Actually, he found the idea rather funny. It's a good job I was already up, though they only arrived a minute or so after I'd gotten out of bed. No doubt Alice timed it that way. She probably saw that you'd be less likely to protest if it was only me they were disturbing. Charlie snorted. "Probably." I rolled my eyes and went to retrieve my toast. "You don't mind that I won't be eating dinner with you and the Cullens, do you, Bells?" "It's just I swear it's fine, Dad. Besides, you're still coming over later, right?" He'd promised Carlisle and Esme that he'd stop by for a drink. Whilst they'd be sipping something resembling red wine, Charlie would be sampling other less exotic things. Once he'd reassured me that he wouldn't be bailing out, Charlie awkwardly handed me a badly wrapped gift. He'd gotten me an iPod. "Sorry, I bought it before you got back. If I'd known then that you were into..." I cut him off with a hug, throwing my arms clumsily around his neck. "I love it, Dad." "Yeah, absolutely. I'll take it over to the Cullens' place. Edward has loads of music. I bet he'll be able to transfer it for me." "Thank you." I opened the gift from Renee then. She'd coordinated with Charlie as usual, and had bought me a speaker system for the musical contraption. It was a large thing, chunky and elliptical, with lots of chrome buttons, a bit like a nuclear warhead. My mom had also sent me a pair of thick, fluffy socks and a box of chocolates, like she did every year. There were Christmas cards to open too, including ones from Harry, Ron, Ginny, and Hermione. Harry, I learnt, was spending Christmas with the Weasleys. His godson, Teddy Lupin, was there too, along with a lady I'd never met before, named Andromeda Tonks. He'd enclosed a picture of himself and the toddler. Teddy's hair was cyan and stuck up on end. He pressed his grubby little hands to my friend's cheek, who pulled silly faces in response, encouraging the boy's laughter. According to the card's message, the two had been practically inseparable since they'd arrived together at the burrow. "Ron has started calling me Dad, and keeps making cracks about being replaced. It's all fun though, since he enjoys spending time with Teddy as much as I do. Mr. Weasley keeps trying to pull me away. He wants me to explain mobile phones, but says the magic around the burrow causes too much interference. Don't know if I'll ever get around to it though. The kid is just too funny, so I always get distracted. Yesterday, he learned how to turn his nose into a pig snout. Sure enough, the boy's nose in the photograph transformed, yet he still managed to somehow look adorable. Once ID said goodbye to Charlie, I went back upstairs to my room and arranged the cards on my desk, and pinned the picture to the notice board hanging above. Then, I collected the gifts ID bought for my family of vampires, all of which ID placed into a deceptively small stocking made of red velvet and white faux fur trim. After that, there was nothing further to do but disapparate from the house. I experienced the usual, nauseating pressure of the magical traveling process, before appearing seconds later on the Cullen porch. Edward was there to open the door before I could even knock, looking like a modern-day deity in mid-gray, pinstriped pants, a white shirt, and a skinny, silver tie. The massive grin he wore dropped off his face in an instant as he took in my appearance, eyes bugging wide whilst his mouth fell open ever so slightly. "Hello," I breathed, blushing profusely under his inspection. His eyes flew back to my face. "Merry Christmas," he replied, his grin returning. "Merry Christmas." He took my free hand in his and pulled me into the house. "You look divine, and you even come with a bow," he chuckled, having noticed the ribbon fastened around my waist. "Are you my Christmas gift?" "Of course." Then, without thinking, I blurted, "I'll let you unwrap me later." My face turned scarlet instantly. Edward, on the other hand, looked just about ready to pounce. I could have sworn his irises, now golden after a recent hunting trip, darkened for a second, flashing with some intense emotion. Was it anger or hunger? After a moment, he settled back into a peaceful composure, and wrapped an arm around my waist. "You know, it's probably a good thing that Charlie found out I have early 20th century morals. It's one of the reasons why he started to like me." He swung me round then so that I was facing him, encased by his strong, marble arms. "We wouldn't want to jeopardize that now, would we?" If he was trying to sway me into agreement, he certainly went the wrong way about it, grazing his lips lightly against mine, whilst slowly tracing circles up and down my back. A high, feminine cough from behind put an end to our embrace. Alice stood by an 8-foot Christmas tree decorated with cream, gold and bronze. She had her arms folded tightly over her ruby surplice dress, and was tapping the sole of her red stiletto against the soft carpet. "Okay, Alice," Edward sighed, "we're ready." "Finally," boomed Emmett. "I thought we'd be waiting forever." The Cullens, being the sleepless creatures that they were, had never had to wait to open presents before. They usually did their unwrapping at midnight. I suppose, therefore, their impatience was understandable, especially now that a whole other realm of gifts had been opened up to them. Esme apologized on behalf of her sons and daughters for their early morning disturbance. She revealed that Edward had stayed behind because he didn't want Charlie to think him irresponsible and inconsiderate. Though he tried to dissuade his siblings from their course of action, in the end, it had been in vain, since there was no way for one vampire to restrain 4 others. I sat with Edward on the love seat as the Cullens lunged for the sea of neatly wrapped gifts spilling out from beneath the tree, desperately trying to stop the laughter threatening to ensue as they attacked the paper like 4 shredders, littering the floor around them. Carlyle and Esme seemed content to wait until after their children had finished, neither attempting to wrestle their way into the mania. Instead, they sat on the adjacent couch, Esme perched on her husband's lap, whose arms encircled her waist. "Here," I said, after pulling the right packages from my stocking, "I got these for you both." The pair smiled brightly and accepted the presents, thanking me as they unhurriedly tore away the gold wrapping. Esme examined the art set with a look of pleasure, carefully running her fingers over each instrument. Carlyle's expression, on the other hand, turned from confused to absolutely ecstatic in a heartbeat, as his eyes traced the words engraved along the rim of the magical magnifying glass. Is this what I think it is?" he questioned excitedly. I nodded. "It translates everything, and I know, because I've tried it. I looked up the Dead Sea Scrolls on Google Images. Aramaic is no problem. I even ran it over a copy of The Lord of the Rings Elvish. Isn't a problem either. It translates codes too, so, basically, anything with meaning." Carlyle's grin grew to twice its size, and in the ensuing seconds, he seemed torn between the need to examine the magnifying glass more closely, and the desire to communicate his appreciation. Being the perfect gentleman, however, his manners won out, and I received from him and his wife a tight, loving hug, immediately after which, the vampire doctor whizzed away to retrieve an ancient wizarding tome. When he arrived back a minute or so later, he seated himself beside Esme and set about reading, quickly immersing himself in the text. Every now and then, he would utter words like fascinating and incredible, meaning that my purchase had paid off. Alice adored the pedal bag and the extra accessories it contained. She held her hands out expectantly as I reached into the stocking, her smile manic as she waited for the gift she'd clearly already glimpsed. I had to cover my ears once I'd handed it over, for she expressed her joy with loud, high-pitched squeals, insisting afterwards that there was hope for me yet. Rosalie's reaction was a little more controlled than her sister's. She accepted the ring gratefully, her eyes hinting at a mixture of understanding, doubt, and hope as I told her it was a good luck charm. I deliberately refrained from mentioning its true intended purpose, because I didn't want to darken the atmosphere with talk of her inability to conceive a child. "It's very pretty, Bella," she said sincerely, sliding the ring onto the index finger of her right hand. "And the rose is fitting." "Thank you. You're welcome. I hope it works for you," I added silently. Edward squeezed my hand in his. Though he couldn't have heard my thoughts, since I was still shielded, he clearly understood the meaning behind the gift. Jasper almost managed to entirely conceal his disappointment after pulling the wrapping from the thick leather-bound book I'd bought him, but I caught the way his mouth turned down infinitesimally at the corners. Alice stood at his side, a subtle grin painted onto her face. I held my breath as her husband flipped past the cover, hoping the seer's confident demeanor meant I'd not messed up after all. The Cullens fell still as the unfamiliar voice echoed through the room. "Who are you, soldier? Speak." Jasper's brow knitted together in confusion. Jasper Hale, previously known as Jasper Whitlock. From over his blonde-haired brother's shoulder, Emmett's face appeared, eager, as he seemed to be, to investigate. "It's a book of warlords, heroes, political leaders, and crazy despots," I explained, walking over to join the empath. On the 2 pages he was looking at, there was a portrait of a man in classical armor. He was standing on a beach, holding a long sword in one hand, and a large, golden shield in the other. It was intricately designed, with lots of pictures carved into the surface. He also had an arrow protruding from his ankle, which kind of gave his identity away. "You must be Achilles," I said with a smile. The man in the portrait flushed a deep red, gritting his teeth in anger, before he bellowed, "Achilles. It's pronounced Achilles, not Achilles. Achilles is the Roman version, and I happen to be Greek. Get it right." He pointed to the opposite page with his sword, where there were a few paragraphs of relevant information describing the life of the ancient warrior. Sure enough, the header read swift-footed Achilles, son of Peleus, more commonly referred to as Achilles. "It says here that you were a proud and angry king with a tendency to take things too far." Achilles' eyes flared with rage, and I soon regretted my statement, for I was subjected to a string of verbal abuse and derogatory comments. Edward growled viciously in response, flying forwards to snap the book shut. "Well, that's the first time anyone's ever called me that," I said in shock. "I guess this means you're going to have to be polite to the portraits, Jasper, or they might be a bit uncooperative." He nodded in agreement, awestruck as he flipped the book open to Winston Churchill. Mr. Churchill was much more pleasant than the Homeric warrior, and quickly plunged his new owner into an intriguing discussion about the war, divulging scandalous details regarding certain Tories, as well as explaining what it felt like to govern a country during such a tragic period in history. Jasper, meanwhile, sat and listened with total fascination. Emmett chuckled and shook his head. Who would have thought? The burly vampire was more than happy with the present I'd bought him. As it turned out, when I'd paid a visit to Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, my old friend had kind of been expecting me. The memory of that visit was bittersweet, laced with both happiness and pain. I closed my eyes as I took a moment to run over it once more. Stepping into the shop, I was surprised by how similar it appeared to the first time I'd visited. I don't know what I'd been expecting for it to have fallen into disrepair, perhaps. It just seemed so strange that it could survive without Fred. It seemed so strange that George himself could survive without Fred. It was 5 minutes to closing time, and the place was practically empty, the customers filing out into the alley. Edward had left me so that I could make this visit alone. He knew how close I'd been with the twins, and this was sure to be an emotional encounter. As I came to the table where the portable swamps were sat on display, I gently ran my fingertips along one of the packages, reminiscing over the occasions when I'd terrorized Dolores Umbridge with the twins and Lee Jordan. We had some good times with those, didn't we? I spun on the spot, startled at the voice. My old friend stood before me, garbed in a purple suit and a lime green tie, his hair messy and untamed, like something you'd expect to see on the head of a mad professor. Without answering, I launched myself forwards and threw my arms around his neck, unaware of how tightly I was squeezing until he started choking from a lack of air. "Sorry, George," I apologized, taking a step back. "S all right, Belle C. Always knew you had a bit of a thing for me. Looks like I've still got it." We both laughed then, though it wasn't the easy, carefree type that once would have sounded when we were together. There was an undertone of sadness to this laughter, because it sounded incomplete, its echo missing. "How's things?" I asked carefully, not wanting to upset him. He sighed and moved closer, sliding onto the table, where he sat with his hands weaved together, as if in prayer. "It's hard, Bells. Really hard. I keep thinking that maybe if we'd been a bit more independent from each other when he was still here, that this wouldn't be so difficult now." My heart was in danger of shattering as George's eyes connected with mine watering suddenly because his were. "I feel like I've lost half of myself." I nodded. "But you'll find him again someday. That's what Harry said. He's got Ron and Ginny believing it too. He came back from the dead, George," I reminded him. "If there was ever any proof that there's something after, it's Harry. I believe him, so does Edward. You know he reads minds. He saw the place that Harry went to during that last fight." George's eyes widened a little, a spark of hope and belief igniting there. "He did, yes." For a minute, the two of us fell into silence. Then, suddenly, George wiped the moisture from his eyes with the back of his velvet sleeve, and hopped down from the table. Slowly, a grateful smile crept its way onto his face, and for the first time in what felt like years, I glimpsed a flash of his old self. "In that case, I guess I'd better stop moping and convince you to buy something. Fred'll never forgive me if I have to tell him this place went bust." "No, he won't," I agreed, grinning again. "Actually, he'll probably kick your butt for it and call you a sniveling prat." "Ha, bet you right. Wonder what he's doing. Probably terrorizing one of Filch's ancestors, at least until he has the real thing to mess with. That would be Fred's definition of heaven. And Filch's definition of hell." A dreamy expression slowly slid onto George's face, his freckly cheeks flushing with warmth at what, to him, must have been a joyous notion. After a few more minutes of discussing his beloved twin, and the antics he would surely be getting up to on some separate plane of existence, my friend excitedly pulled me towards the back of the shop, jabbering the entire way there about some new product he'd just developed. Well, after meeting the Cullens, I realized there was a whole new market to cater for. A tiny one, granted, but since I am not producing this new line by the hundreds, I am sure I'll be able to make a decent return. Had to contact Sanguini, that vamp who hangs around with Eldred Wurple, the author of Blood Brothers, My Life Amongst the Vampires. They were at Slughorn's party, I remembered. Right. Anyways, Sanguini helped me test the products, so I was hoping you'd turn up, otherwise I wouldn't have anyone to sell them to, and it would have been a bit of a waste. Wait, hold up, I protested, pulling George to a halt. "What are you going on about?" He waved to the violet curtain before us, from which hung a sign labeled "Off Limits." After throwing me the cheesiest grin imaginable, his eyebrows wiggling like hairy ginger worms, he flung back the drapes to reveal the restricted section of the store. "Here it is," he said, skipping forwards to pick up a scarlet box. I caught it as he threw it in my direction, my mind filling with the endless possibilities as I read the label. "Blood Drinker Devilry Pack, trick candy designed specifically for vampires." George nodded, clearly proud with his latest achievement. "There's one type in there that will take away their strength for a couple of hours." "How?" I gawked incredulously. "Well, the magic doesn't actually affect their muscles. It just tells their brains to restrict the amount they use them. It's more a trick of the mind, similar to the sweet that completely removes their sense of balance." He then went on to tell me about each product in the jokes kit. According to George, There was one sweet that prevented any vampire who ate it from speaking normally, forcing them to sing instead. There were fierce sweets too, ones that provoked extreme paranoia. One of the pieces sent the eater into a lifelike daydream, exactly like the kind that would result from using a Weasley patented daydream charm. Now, vampires are smart, and you can just expect them to eat one of these of their own free will, George explained, so whoever you give it to, make sure to tell them they'll probably have to force it into their victim's mouth. Once that's done though, the candy melts instantly into really sweet blood. It will be their first instinct to swallow. After thanking my friend and paying for the blood drinker devilry pack, I locked him in a fierce hug. Thanks, Bells, he murmured. I am really glad you came. Me too, I whispered. Eventually, we released one another. I handed George a wrapped parcel filled with magic sweets. He, in return, gave me a free portable swamp for old-time sake, along with a headless hat, insisting, when I protested, that he was feeling generous, and that if I wanted to repay him, all I had to do was use the hat to spook any enemy muggles living in my area. I agreed and hugged him one last time, before departing the shop. I sighed as I remembered that meeting. Truly, it seemed so wrong seeing one twin without the other, but at least George was finally beginning to believe that it was more a case of see you later than goodbye forever. I was sure he'd be strong enough to get through the next 100 years or so, as long as he had that hope to cling to. Emmett grinned evilly as he examined the jokes kit, his eyes darting from one vampire to another. There's no way you getting me with that, Edward warned, so don't even bother trying. Not a chance, bro. You going down. The three Cullen brothers disputed the matter further, whilst I opened my presents. I received everything from a whole new wardrobe of clothing, courtesy of Alice, to my very own set of Quidditch balls, all of which came nicely packaged in an oak case. After the vampires had their turn exchanging gifts, Carlisle invited Talto into the house. He brought with him, held in his beak, a small sprig of purple wildflowers, which he dropped into my lap upon landing. Ah, Tal, I said, touched, they lovely. Thank you. He nibbled my ear affectionately, before taking off once more. I had to laugh. The womanizer had a tiny bouquet for each female, and proceeded to make the deliveries, after which, he landed on Rosalie's thigh, and spread his wings, whilst simultaneously puffing out his breast, thereby fully displaying of his plumage. His head turned from the blonde to her sister, then to Esme, before, finally, back to me, his big round eyes clearly intending to communicate the words "come hither." Emmett cracked out laughing. Looks like we've got some competition, men. The other male vampires chuckled lowly, still smiling. I extended my arm and shook my head, though, in all honesty, I was far from shocked. Come here, Casanova. Talto did as I requested and fluttered through the air, landing gracefully on my upheld limb. You're such a lady killer, you know that. When are you going to stop philandering and settle down? Haven't you met any lady owls that have caught your fancy yet? The owl released a regretful hoot and shook his head. I wouldn't worry, Talto, Edward sighed. All good things come to those who wait. I should know. He winked at me and flashed his crooked smile, causing my heart to skip a beat. He's right, Esme cooed at the bird. Besides, who could resist such a handsome owl like you? Her words earned her a hoot of appreciation and a nibble to her ear. I rolled my eyes. My owl was a smooth operator, and would be until the end. When he finally did decide to make a nest for himself, he'd problem end up building a crib big enough for a harem, a feathery harem. For Christmas, the Cullens and I gave Talto a bag each of owl treats, much to his delight. He flew out of the mansion with Emmett, Jasper, Alice, and Rosalie, as they zoomed off on their new firebolts, all of which had been purchased for them by their parents. I quickly offered my quaffle before they left. A bit of Quidditch would surely keep them occupied for an hour or so. Now alone, Edward wove his fingers through mine and led me upstairs, into his room. I sat cross-legged on the bed as he flashed away to his wardrobe, where he told me he'd stored my gift. When he returned, he held a rather large box wrapped in silver paper. What is it? I asked nervously. He sat down across from me, and placed the package between us. Open it and find out. With trembling hands, I ripped away the wrapping, unveiling in the process a square wooden box, decorated with the image of an oriental dragon. My chest tightened as I undid the clasps holding it shut, so that I could hardly breathe when I finally lifted the lid. I gasped aloud at the contents. A pensieve. I wasn't sure why, but the sight of the round silver bowl put a lump in my throat and brought moisture to my eyes. I know how much you don't want to forget your human memories, Edward murmured, his voice low and deep. If we made copies of all the ones you want to keep before I change you won't have to. My tears spilled over the edges at his words, and the need to hold him suddenly became too overwhelming and unbearable to ignore. I urgently pushed myself forwards, and was struck by a surge of relief as my arms shot around his neck, pulling his face to mine. Our kiss was neither entirely sweet, nor entirely passionate. It was a tangled mixture of the two, fierce and hungry one minute, then slow and tender the next. Thank you, I murmured against his icy skin. He smiled, caressing my cheek with his hand. Do you like it? I love it. My memories, especially the ones involving you, are the most precious things I own. Now I get to keep them. I am glad, Edward sighed, his radiant face suddenly jubilant. Do you want to test it out? I laughed at his enthusiasm and nodded, but stopped him as he made to remove the pensieve from its velvet-lined box. First, I have something to give you too. He bit his lip nervously. The sight did strange things to my insides, warmth flickering like an ember in my belly. You didn't spend a lot, did you? You sound like me, I pointed out. He rolled his eyes. Yes, well, unlike you, for the past century, I've had a psychic on hand to help me play the stock markets. That's not the point. What is the point? The point is it's Christmas, the season for giving. Reaching into the stocking, I pulled out the last present, and passed it to my vampire fiancé. He pulled me down so that I was lying with him against the comforter, my head resting on his shoulder. After removing the wrapping from the casing, he opened the box and pulled out the wristband, removing with it the 5 accompanying mirrors. The band itself was about 2.5 inches wide and made from black leather. The buckle was made from platinum, thus matching the square relief fixed onto the band. At first sight, anyone would assume the relief to be merely for decorative purposes. Engraved into the shiny metal was the outline of the all-seeing eye, the same insignia found on the US dollar. On 2 of its sides, however, similar to the little knobs you'd find on a wind-up watch, were 2 tiny, circular dials, both embedded with a diamond, indicating a hidden purpose. My fingers found the catch on the edge of the square centerpiece, and I pulled it open to reveal an inside mirror. It's a spying band, I stated, my voice seeming to echo. You place the mirrors anywhere in the world that you want to keep an eye on, and then you twist the dial, this one on the right, to switch between views. Throughout my explanation, Edward's expression gradually became more and more amused, though I discerned an undercurrent of some deeper emotion. So let's say I wanted to keep an eye on a certain someone whilst I was away, he hinted, to make sure they were safe. I grinned, glad that he was getting it. Well, in that case, you could always place one of your mirrors on this someone's bedside table, or somewhere else he or she would be likely to spend their time. And you can hear sounds through these mirrors. He guessed. I nodded. The dial on the left is for volume. Me and Charlie tried it out. Charlie stood in the garden singing Springsteen songs into one of the mirrors, and I stood in the living room with the wristband and the TV at full volume, turning the left dial until I couldn't hear the baseball commentary anymore. Edward's crooked grin was dazzling as he wrapped the band around his wrist. I know you worry, I murmured. My stomach felt as if it had become the home to dozens of butterflies. The spying band itself had cost me a pretty penny, so I desperately hoped that Edward would like it. Yes, I do, he admitted softly, kissing my nose. When we re-apart, no matter what I am doing, there's always some section of my brain wondering whether or not you're safe. He flashed the platinum relief at me then and grinned. You have no idea what this will do for my peace of mind. I only wish I'd known about spying bands earlier. I could have saved myself a lot of stress. Thank you, he purred silkily, his lips only an inch from mine now, truly for everything. Why you're welcome, I breathed, almost too dazzled to respond. Just as I was about to close the tiny distance separating us, something flat and cold slid into my palm. I looked down to see one of the square mirrors resting in my hand. That one's for when you go out, Edward smirked. Keep it in your purse or something. Then, no matter where you go, I'll know you're safe. All right, I agreed, but you do know you can put these mirrors in other places, right? Anywhere in the world you want to keep watch over. I know, but honestly, Bella, I'd rather just look at you. And before I could comment, his lips silenced mine, and, well, that was that. EPOV. What memory is this? I asked, barely able to contain my excitement as a new world formed around us. So far, Bella had shown me the visit from McGonagall that had opened her eyes to the magical world, her first trip to Diagon Alley, and the first time she played against Slytherin. It was fascinating to be able to watch her development, so much so that I felt slightly guilty I was taking just as much pleasure from the pensieve as she was. Wait and see, she smirked mischievously, giggling shortly afterwards. We were standing in a long, dark corridor, the familiar architecture making the place instantly recognizable. Moonlight shining through the panels of the large arched windows provided the only illumination, casting an eerie, silver glow throughout the Hogwarts passage. "Coast's clear," someone whispered behind us. I turned to see 4 figures, all clothed from head to toe in black. Balaclavas concealed their faces, so that their eyes were the only visible part of their bodies. I found Bella's beautiful chocolate ones immediately. The body shape of her accomplices told me that she was the only female amongst them, meaning that the others were probably Lee Jordan and the twins, since they had been her closest friends at one time. They ran from one end of the corridor to the other, merging with the shadows, sometimes almost impossible to see in their black attire. Experiencing darkness again through a human memory felt incredibly strange after so many years of being a vampire. It frustrated me completely that I couldn't make out all the details. "Don T let it spill," a male voice hissed, either Fred S. or George S. "Don T let what spill?" I strained my eyes for clearer vision. "Is that a cauldron?" I asked. Voracious intrigue blazed through my mind as I made out a small rounded shape, the sight coupled with the sound of sloshing liquid. "Might be," Bella answered enigmatically. She must have sensed the irritation her unforthcoming attitude inspired, because a furtive smirk flashed across her face. My eyes narrowed with suspicion, but I didn't press the issue, for I would surely receive my answers as the promising and potentially humorous memory neared its conclusion. The infamous group ahead plunged deeper into the castle, darting stealthily this way and that, quietly so as not to wake the sleeping figures in the portraits, until they came to a tapestry concealing a hidden staircase. The softer, more feminine figure of the 4 pulled it back without hesitation. I inhaled sharply as my eyes were met with a looming shadow, one barring the way of my lovable miscreant. Upon distinguishing the orange bow tie and bell-covered hat, however, the coil in my stomach relaxed. "Hi, Peeves." The poltergeist spun in mid-air, greeting the girl with a whispered song. "Izzy Bell, wish you well, give that ugly bat some hell." "Thanks," the witch replied. "Are you ready to help us out?" With a series of energetic nods, Peeves pledged his allegiance. "You planned this rendezvous," I guessed as Peeves dove away, leading the group down from the 4th floor. "Of course," Bella confirmed, with a tone that suggested she found my uncertainty mildly offensive. My eyes rolled automatically and I swept back the tapestry, holding it aside as I waited for her to pass. She'd accepted my unrelenting chivalrous habits long ago, and moved without question. After exiting the secret staircase, the poltergeist silently guided us down a series of twisting passages, occasionally zooming ahead to sneak a peek around each corner, thereby ensuring that the students wouldn't encounter any wandering teachers. Finally, after 3 minutes of safe and covert navigation, he pulled up in front of an office door, the one marking the home of the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. One twin took up a post at the far end of the corridor. Lee was already manning the other. Bella grinned like a lunatic as her memory self extracted her wand from her pocket, and conjured a length of thick, yellow rope. Whilst the second twin supported the cauldron, she silently tied one end to its handle, and fastened the other to the doorknob, before pointing her weapon at the cauldron itself and charming it into the air. It floated up until it rested directly over the doorway, ready to tip with the slightest pull. The girl made hand gestures to the mystery twin, calling him back, whilst her partner conjured a set of symbols for the spectral, avid mischief maker. Peeves took them eagerly, and waited until his friends had raced around the corner at the end of the corridor, where Lee was on guard. Their eyes peeked out from the blackness as they gave the poltergeist the thumbs up. "Smash, smash, smash. We want old Umbridge out." Of that we have no doubt. The stinking toad should hit the road and save herself a clout. We want old Umbridge out. And so it went on over and over again. Peeves didn't concern himself with keeping the cymbals' clashes in time with the song. The effect was a thunderous cacophony, one which quickly triggered the high protests of its intended target. Peeves, she shrieked from inside the office. Shut up. The poltergeist ignored her and continued his discordant chanting, wearing a gleeful expression all the while. Umbridge's plump silhouette appeared as she violently wrenched the door open, and stepped into the path of the spill. I said. Her enraged orders morphed into shrill screams of horror as the pink potion spilled over her head and nightdress, the racket echoing through the halls like a siren. Peeves, meanwhile, discarded his brass instruments, and broke out into ecstatic applause, whilst the bunch at the end of the corridor laughed into their hands. Bingo, whispered Lee. Fury quickly overwhelmed the woman, her hands balling into fists and her lips curling back over her teeth. You wretched, despicable creature. She seethed. Look what you've done. Yea. Bella sighed beside me, staring on at the scene with dreamy eyes. Beautiful, isn't it? What did you tip on her? There was a slight pause, in which time she continued to reminisce, thoroughly dazed. She quickly snapped out of it though, and turned her head into my chest, using my hard skin to muffle her giggles. Something colorful, she replied. Seeing my confusion, she then gestured to the fluorescent pink puddle pooled on the floor, and added, Umbridge is a big fan of pink that's magic dye. We were doing the old hag a favor. Our eyes flicked to the memory Bella and her three accomplices then, whose faces suddenly disappeared out of view. Let us go, I urged, sweeping my beautiful and ingenious fiancée onto my back. We surged back through the second-floor maze, shooting after the 4 Gryffindors as they traveled back up the concealed staircase. The boys raced in front, younger Bella struggling to keep up. I kept pace with her, concerned for her welfare, though I still realized, of course, that there'd be nothing I'd be able to do to help her should she encounter trouble. This was a memory after all. The door leading out onto the grand staircase came into view as the group rounded the next corner. Bella was still struggling at the back and, predictably, after making it a third of the way down the hall, she tripped over her own feet, sending herself crashing head first to the floor. A squeak automatically escaped her lips as she collided with the solid ground, causing the boys, who were now 15 meters in front, having failed to notice earlier the lead they gained, to halt and turn immediately. 1 second later, Argus Filch came tearing out from the 4th-floor bathroom, into the space separating Bella from the others. His eyes instantly zeroed in on the most vulnerable individual, lighting up like 2 bulbs on a Christmas tree, whilst his mouth pulled back into a triumphant sneer. I got you now, I have. You'll have holes in your hands by the time you've finished writing them lines. Bella, I probed, afraid now. SSH, she soothed, kissing my cheek from behind. Trust me, and that's all she had to say to relax me completely. The memory girl arranged herself into a cat-like crouch, snatching her wand back out from her pocket, her eyes narrowing with determination as she gazed upon her enemy. Filch seemed to sense what was about to happen, for his arms flew out on either side of him in his attempt to bar the way, legs spread as widely as possible. A battle cry ripped the air as the witch pushed off from the ground, injecting every morsel of strength into her legs as they propelled her towards the beady-eyed caretaker, whose pleasure melted suddenly into outright fear. With only 3 meters separating her from a disastrous collision, Bella pointed her wand at the floor and cried, Glacio. Twisting jets of sparkling white erupted from the tip, spilling across the floor before her to create a thin runway. I stared on proudly as the witch threw herself down onto the icy path, the cold line continuing to form as she slid beneath Filch's legs. The boys cheered and hooted at the spectacle. They even had to run to catch up with her as she whizzed past, carried all the way to the end of the corridor by her strong momentum. Nice one, B, called Lee, his voice only just audible over Filch's wild and incoherent barking. Before the witch and wizards flitted out onto the grand staircase, one twin flung something back over his shoulder, aiming a spell at it as it spiraled through the air. The next few seconds unfolded almost lethargically, the energy seeming to have been sapped from time. The Weasley stamped box exploded as it hit the ground, projecting a wave of putrid green slime, mounds of moss, wiry grass, and creeping colorful weeds back through the passage. The unfortunate caretaker got caught up in the middle of it all, no longer a threat as he was swallowed by the portable swamp. Terrific. Superb. Incredible. I cheered a minute later, bounding through the portrait hole. I couldn't find enough praise to wrap my tongue around. I was too jazzed. My wonder escalated as the laughing willowy girl before me pulled the black balaclava from her head, and shook out a fountain of uncoiling mahogany hair, her smiling face flushed from exertion. A peaceful sigh escaped my lips as I took in the younger Bella. She wasn't quite woman yet, her features still possessing that girlish youth, but that didn't make her any less mine. Mission accomplished, the twins proclaimed together. After unveiling their faces, they gave one another a high five. God, Lee breathed in between cackles, I can't wait to see that old bat in the morning. Ditto, giggled Bella. Oh, what fun we'll have. The present Bella hopped down off my back as Gryffindor common room faded around us, a new scene materializing instead. Now Bella sat amongst her peers in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, awaiting the arrival of the odious gargoyle who had spent so long terrorizing the school. A door at the back of the classroom flung open with a bang, and there stood Umbridge. I couldn't help doubling over at the sight of her. She was garbed in what, according to Bella, was her typical attire: pink heels, a pink linen dress, and a pink tweed poncho. What made the image so satisfying was that the squat witch looked like she belonged to some subspecies of Oompa Loompa, her skin fluorescent pink rather than orange, just like her curly hair, which stuck up in tufts, completely untamed, as if she'd just been dragged through a hedge. Her lips were pinched tight as she marched through the aisle of desks, head held high in her efforts to ignore the muffled laughter, muted guffaws, and quiet sneering. Memory Bella sat with her mouth pressed to her fists, her frame trembling as she tried to prevent her joy from bursting through the seams. Mr. Finnegan, Umbridge squawked unexpectedly, turning on her heels as she reached the front of the class, would you please explain to me why you were crying? IMSS, so sorry, Professor, Seamus squeaked breathlessly, wiping tears from either cheek. I just got something in my eye, even higher pitched now, and it really hurts. The sound of the soprano dialogue triggered an unstoppable chain reaction like a dam giving way under immense pressures. The control of the students came crashing down all at once, collapsing into uncontrollable howls of laughter and cackling pandemonium. Enough, shrieked Umbridge, her expression irate. How satisfying it was to see this woman, the one responsible for so much misery, become the embodiment of fury and mortification. Her cheeks were flushed red with embarrassment, her nostrils flared widely like a bull's, and she stamped her foot loudly against the wooden floor. Silence. Enough, enough, enough. Even as the memory disintegrated around us, the sound of those cackles still rang in my ears. Bella and that I rocketed upwards collectively, taking pictures out of the Chinese language pensive and onto the lush, golden carpet. She stumbled at the start, the shift into truth throwing her equilibrium. My fingers shot out robotically, but she regained her stability earlier than my assistance became vital. Newton Ball, she stated, noticing my wonder. Oh, right. That might explain it. She rolled her eyes as she took a step closer. A delicious tingle rolled up my spine when she lightly brushed my back with her fingertips, scary and involuntary shudder. It by no means ceased to amaze me that Bella had selected me, nor would my wonder at being capable of being so close to her without killing her ever lessen. I pulled her closer, keen to enjoy the miracle, and become so fed on by using the photograph of her face that I slightly observed the piercing shriek of horror interrupting the instant. Something difficult crashed into my side, all of a surprising, the pressure so large that it sent me flying. My eyes took in every element as I torpedoed through the air, however that failed to assist me make any more experience of the scene. As I crashed via the glass wall, the whole lot shattering around me with the effect, the only element I ought to surprise became why Alice's face was so overwhelmed with horror as she clutched my harassed and terrified fiancé. Had I been approximately to hurt her? That couldn't be proper. I would not. Instinctively, I threw myself into every mind within the location, the air nonetheless whistling round me as I plummeted down towards the river. So, consequently, earlier than I plunged into the speeding current, my mind had advanced from mystified and worried to flat-out irate, all in the area of what could have been a heartbeat. My legs pushed of the riverbed with greater pressure than that of a cement truck doing 60, sending walls of water rolling onto each banks as I shot into the air. Emmett, I roared, you are so lifeless. Laughter boomed from inside the house. My sniggering brother marched out quickly afterwards, flanked by a grinning Rosalie. "Ah, Edward. You're all wet. You could have killed her." I spat. "Did that even cross your idiotic thoughts?" The most effective aspect my anger did become to serve in fueling my brother's entertainment. He doubled over and barked out another round of laughter. "You cannot blame me for that, bro. Alice tackled you now, not me. She's the only with the concern." My anger turned into too super to include now it wished an outlet. I lunged forwards with such speed that Emmett did not have time to react. His eyes bulged as my clenched fist collided with his jaw, and, suddenly, he changed into the only that was being sent flying. Bit of an over-response, Edward, Rosalie idea, rolling her eyes. An overreaction. I wager she wouldn't had been saying that if she'd had a human mate that had been charged via a mad, worry-troubled vampire. I overlooked her besides, and marched closer to the house, glass crunching underfoot as I neared. From the out-of-doors, I could see that half of the glass wall had been completely ruined, unable to face up to the disastrous pressure of the blow. Now wasn't the time to problem myself with that, even though what involved me extra turned into the truth that Alice had snatched Bella, who had simply no idea what changed into occurring, from my room, and changed into now proceeding to stuff her right into a garments bag in her closet. "What the hell are you? SSH, Bella." Alice hushed in terrified whispers, clamping a give up the woman's mouth. "You need to be quiet. We can let him locate you." In her irrational country, she obviously not noted the fact that the concealment she'd provided wouldn't prevent me from locating Bella, despite the fact that I hadn't been a mind reader. To her though, its principal cause became to preserve Bella from me. I might be less complicated to hold at bay if she failed to need to constantly worry about containing her captive. Bella's eyes bulged as my sister pressed tape over her lips, sealing them close. Alice then zipped up the clothes bag, ignoring the beating frame interior. I hissed, completely enraged as I whizzed through the residing room. Carlisle and Esme were stood at the lowest of the staircase, staring up at Jasper with baffled expressions as he clutched the banister, his palms snaking round it, at the same time as his legs dangled limply behind him. In an try and get up instantly, he finally let pass, but fell over nearly without delay, and ended up rolling backtrack to the very backside, so that he was splayed out at Carlisle and Esme's toes. Their eyes snapped up to satisfy me, widening even more so as they took in my dripping clothes. We were within the kitchen, Esme instructed me, making ready dinner for Bella, and then I interrupted her mind in my haste. Emmett decided to use the jokes package. It became a snap choice. Alice didn't have time to react. He compelled the paranoia candy on her, and then Rose helped him to get Jasper with the balance stealing one. And when it ultimately wears off, my blonde-haired brother broke in, his voice loaded with frustration. "You and that I are going to lead them to sorry, Edward. I am certain Alice will best be too happy to help." "Truly," I growled, "but, right now, I need to get her away from Bella." Jasper nodded, looking to sit up. "Move easy on her though. This isn't her fault." As soon as I might agreed, he appeared to our mother and father, and stated, "Would you mind sporting me over to the couch, please? I'll in no way get there on my own." They acquiesced. Simply before I left, I saw Jasper reaching for the e-book Bella had bought him for Christmas. He quickly started flipping via the pages, looking for Hitler. Whilst Carlisle requested him what he changed into doing, he explained that he had to vent a few anger. It became a remedy that Bella did not have vampire listening to. I wouldn't need her to have to pay attention to the obscene profanities that followed. Alice changed into anticipating me as I turned off the staircase, standing 10 meters away in the very center of the corridor. Her frame was leaning forwards ever so barely, as though she were making ready for fight. Part of my brain swelled with affection for my little sister. It was endearing to peer how deeply she cared for Bella, and the lengths she might go to defend her. "I am not going to hurt her," I stated lightly, edging forwards. "Live again," she warned. My palms flew up in my efforts to reassure her. "It is good enough, Alice, I promise." "No it isn't always, Edward. She's a human, you are a vampire. You will kill her. You want her blood. I will let you." I took every other careful breakthrough. "Alice, I recognize you imply properly, but what you feel right now, this fear, it isn't real. It is an impact of the candy. I made to take some other step, however Alice crouched defensively, her mouth ripping right into a ferocious snarl. Okay, good enough. All right, I am no longer coming any nearer. Simply relax. Now, not until you turn the hell round. My brain flew over 100 exceptional methods in those following few seconds, as I considered how nice to cope with my insane leprechaun sister. Truly, not anything became going to remove Alice's paranoia. The magic was simply going to have to run its path, but there has been no way. I was making plans on allowing Bella to spend the following couple of hours locked in a clothes bag. Perhaps, then, all I needed to do became to divert my sister's worry in any other direction. Somehow, I controlled to suppress a smile as I subsequently addressed the psychic vampire. Alice, I whispered, so low now that only she could be able to pay attention. Me, Emmett and Rosalie are planning on stealing your new garments. She straightened up immediately, her expression horrified. They are going to come back at you collectively, whilst you re-shield us down. What? Why would they do that? She whispered lower back. No longer my clothes. They are trying to entertain themselves, and that they assume the first-rate way to do that is by means of replacing all your clothes with sweatpants. Alice's hands shot up over her mouth. She squeaked against her fingers, her chest rising and falling like a human would after a marathon. And wife beaters. No, she screamed. What do I do, Edward? What do I do? I smiled as she flitted to my side, grabbing desperately at my wet blouse. Nicely, in this case, the excellent defense is a great offense. Disable them one after the other, even as they unsuspecting. A deep delight bubbled in my intestine as I proceeded to suggest she attack Emmett first, considering he become truly the chief on this operation. Now completely distracted, Alice nodded, and flew stealthily away, not anything but an inky blur. I wasted no time, whooshing forth into my sister's room, flinging returned the doorways to her stroll-in dresser. I pulled the zipper on the beading bag so forcefully that it broke off in my fingers upon accomplishing the lowest. Huge chocolate eyes stared out at me from internal, and that I quick lifted out the anxious lady, tearing away the ropes that sure her palms and toes. Thank you, she advised me mentally. Now give an explanation for what inside the Call of Merlin's butthole just happened. Her hands fumbled on the tape over her mouth, as she deliberated whether or not to pull it off rapidly, or to peel it away slowly. The short way is normally the pleasant, or so I've heard. She closed her eyes and nodded. Cross for it. I winced on the concept of causing her pain, but did as she asked. Her eyes clenched tighter as I freed her mouth, so I fast pressed my lips over hers, hoping to appease the edge with my cold temperature. She gave into it right away, her hands clutching at my clothes in a completely exceptional manner to my sister's in advance. I took my tries at mind control a step similarly as I exhaled onto her face. She moaned lightly upon inhaling my heady scent. When I ultimately pulled lower back, I would nearly totally forgotten the motive of the exercise, simply as dazzled as my counterpart. That was. A excessive bellow interrupted her reverie. After a few seconds, it faded into strangled, agonized sobbing. Bella shot to her toes in surprise, however I fell back towards the floor, howling with laughter on the snapshots flashing through my thoughts, for someplace outside, just beyond the preliminary line of timber across the river, my behemoth brother becomes scrunched into the fetal position on the wooded area floor. It took a lot to harm considered one of our kind below the belt. A supercar at full pace might not were able to generate sufficient strength for that, however a crazed vampire fashionista fearing for her beloved cloth cabinet changed into, seemingly, enough to do the trick. Alice's eyes were wary as they took in the cuisine located on the desk before Bella. For as soon as the eating room became getting used for its intended purpose, my adoptive parents had gone to incredible lengths to make certain that their human nearly daughter received the full Christmas special, and had adorned the room with boughs of holly, twinkling lights, and white candles protected with iridescent glitter. In addition, that they had organized dozens of various sorts of meals, all of which were organized on silver platters. The female had gazed upon the sight with a look of outright fear, knowing there was no way that one human alone might be able to consume it all. Esme, evidently, had confident her that she wasn't anticipated to clean the table, and that they'd be glad to wrap up the leftovers, in order that she and her father might have something for later, in case they were given hungry. Are you certain that S secure? Alice requested, not pretty dealing with to cover her panic. Even though the magic of the trick candy was beginning to put on off, there has been nevertheless certainly a touch of it left in her machine, because she become eyeing the carrot speared on Bella's fork. Love it changed into a dubious piece of blowfish. For heaven's sake, it has now not been dipped in cyanide, I quipped. Bella chuckled at her nice buddy, and lifted the fork to her lips. Her lips closed around empty air though, as my sister swiped the cutlery from her drawer close, and plunged the food into her own mouth. I might have been exasperated with Alice's interference, had her try at consuming a carrot not been such an amusing sight inside the first location. Her fingers flapped furiously, fanning her face as she chewed, eyes clenched into slits. Pity changed into beyond me, however, because the torture became needless and self-inflicted. Ack, she spat, after eventually swallowing the offending orange vegetable. That became disgusting. Bella rolled her eyes. That is because you are a vampire, you ninny. Why did you consume it anyway? To test whether or no longer it changed into safe. Alice shook her head, and reached for the plate. I am sorry, Bella, however there's no way I can assist you to devour that. However I am hungry. It tastes lousy. Only to you. It is probably toxic. Bella snorted. Who here would need to poison me? No person, Alice replied. However before these days, Carlisle and Esme hadn't tea cooked in a protracted, long time. They could have achieved it unintentionally. Alice, I sighed, the meals is great. You wouldn't say that if you'd attempted it. She aggressively stabbed the fork at another carrot. I pressed my mouth right into a tough line as she leaned over the table to thrust it in front of my face. Have a look at it, Edward. Absolutely examine it, and then inform me that it's safe to eat. It's fit to be eaten. Ha, she barked. Ha, it's practically luminescent, probably even radioactive, and orange, damn it. Orange. Did you understand that, at the beginning, those little suckers were crimson or white? The handiest reason why orange ones are so common now is because a bunch of patriotic Dutch farmers produced them to inshape their political colorings. I used to be aware of that, yes. She waved the carrot towards my face, and growled. This component right here, Edward, this repulsive, little obscenity is a mutant freak. A genetically changed legume imposter. Nothing more than an herbaceous fraud. Are you going to concern your lady friend to this, Edward? It is now not natural. How might you feel if Bella become abducted by using men in lab coats and transformed right into a beautified, gaga Barbie, just so she'd be healthy and with the relaxation of society's peroxide clones? My sister, so entirely ate up via her argument, which was veering of at a whole tangent from her original point, did not be aware the effect her words had been having upon Bella, myself, and the relaxation of the own family. Inside the adjacent room, Jasper had his face planted in opposition to a pillow, the sofa trembling under his shaking frame. Rosalie, Esme, and Carlisle had been in similar conditions, all urgent their arms to their mouths to muffle their laughter. Even Emmett, who become nonetheless improving upstairs from Alice's ball-busting attack, had taken a break from abusing Stalin. The Records e-book was fast turning into the circle of relatives' preferred item for pressure comfort and become now taking part in the overall performance. Well, Edward, I think we ought to allow Bella destroy the carrot, I rationalized in among streams of laughter, earlier than snatching the fork from the crazy vampire. You recognize, make the world a higher region and all that. Alice scowled at me and stamped her foot, before stomping angrily from the room. Have it your way, she known as lower back silently, however when Bella gets meals poisoning, do not come crying to me. Meals poisoning from a carrot nicely that changed into one I hadn't heard before. After the tears of joy had stopped their go with the flow, and Bella became sooner or later able to have a look at her meals without breaking into hysterics, she started working on consuming her dinner, complimenting my dad and mom on their culinary abilities. She needed to wait a complete hour earlier than she could control dessert. I had a feeling she may have refused it, had Esme now not been wearing one of these proud expression upon unveiling a holly-crowned plum pudding, dripping with brandy butter. Bella moaned, 5 minutes after completing, rubbing her belly. See, informed you would kill her. I rolled my eyes at Alice's intellectual accusations, concurrently smiling on the girl seated next to me. I am no longer going so that it will consume for every week, she stated. Lack of urge for food is an indication of food poisoning. How could a person so small be so disturbing? I inhaled a deep, calming breath, and informed myself that this was all an impact of Weasley's wizard wheezes. It changed into no longer Alice's fault that she was doubly aggravating today, it turned into Emmett's. Fortunately, I had found the precise treatment to ease my exasperation. All it took was a touch visualization the instant whilst my tiny, enraged sister had lunged down from the snowy cover at my unsuspecting brother, searching each bit. The lunatic she presently was, lips curled returned over her tooth, hands tensed like harpy claws, and eyes as huge as saucers, revealing the insanity within. Emmett had laughed initially, unprepared for what became about to show up. That, of course, had all changed while Alice had aimed a fierce kick to his manhood. As vampires, our physicality became such that we may want to withstand the very finest of pressures, at the same time as also being able to absolutely experience the lightest of touches. Though pain becomes something that not often affected us, whilst we did enjoy it, like pride, we may want to admire it 100 times greater sensitively than any human. So when that gargantuan force, courtesy of Alice, had been aimed immediately among my brother's legs, the resulting suffering and sickness had surged through each cellular of his immortal frame, and he spent the subsequent 5 minutes clamped up at the floor, whimpering to himself. Carlyle amassed him not long after, and had laid him down on the bed he and Rosalie shared, wherein he stayed for the following hour. I would have sympathized, had he now not been liable for almost destroying the love of my life. By the time 3 o'clock rolled around, Jasper had absolutely regained his balance, and Alice turned into freed from the fear. Regardless of the bodily torture she'd inflicted upon our brother in advance, she refused to hold lower back, and gave him a livid rebuke. Certainly, nevertheless fearing for his manhood, which he had taken to protecting along with his arms, he didn't argue. I almost laughed at how everyday normal no matter the supernatural elements this Christmas changed into growing to be. In my head, I compiled a tick list, ticking off what could be classed as conventional festive activities the children waking sleeping circle of relatives participants at and beside the point hour. So as to reduce the look forward to the present trade the serving of Christmas dinner and all of the trimmings turbulence between the gathered circle of relatives individuals pulling crackers a festive movie, in this example, an old version of Dickens' A Christmas Carol the Muppets edition changed into on a different channel, however Bella had no endurance for it, for which I used to be thankful. The most effective thing that became truly lacking from the list was to drink and be merry, which might sincerely manifest ultimately, mainly seeing that Charlie changed into dew. While my dad and mom and siblings cracked open a bottle of Dragon's Blood Chinese language Fireball I refrained from ingesting. I was used to resisting Bella's fragrance, and at the same time as it might continually be hard, I knew that my tooth might never puncture her smooth, translucent skin. The reminiscence of what it felt want to lose her become nevertheless more painful than the venom burn. For that reason, taking a damage from the mystical fluid made sense, due to the fact even as my focus turned into fixed on controlling my longing for Bella's blood, I did not have to fear so much about other dreams. The fire in my throat, surprisingly sufficient, was absolutely alternatively sobering. Bella and I played with the wizarding chess set that I would received out of one of the crackers even as we waited for her father to reach. The crackers additionally contained large colorful bonnets, and we had each donned one for the healthy. Bella's become a fruit hat, adorned with grapes, bananas, oranges, and so forth. Mine changed into a court docket jester's, inexperienced and yellow, with little bells dangling from each department. The two of us regarded ridiculous, therefore the purpose why Alice felt the want to seize the moment on film. At 5 to 6, Charlie knocked on the door. Carlyle greeted him inner, and he hadn't even sat down earlier than Alice turned into handing him a pitcher of hearth whiskey. Thanks, he said uncertainly. After sniffing on the golden liquid, however, he visibly relaxed, realizing that he appreciated its warm bouquet. These items is right like that sake. Fine. Bravery swept through him as his cheeks flushed red. Now, all I should do is inform Bella and the Cullens that Billy and Jake are onto them. Guys, Billy and Jacob Black are onto you. In contrast to Bella, who tensed right now, I felt no purpose to panic. If the canine had told Charlie that my family and I were vampires, I would have already got recognized approximately it. I gave Bella again a gently rub in and tried to ease her fear. Her eyes flicked to mine, and that I smiled at her reassuringly, and then she sighed in alleviation. What gave you that impression, Dad? Charlie bit his lip thoughtfully and rubbed his jaw. Simply matters they stated, he advised us. Jake wanted to know if I would noticed anything one of a kind about you because you come lower back. I didn't think anything of it in the beginning, however he stored pressing the difficulty, to the point in which Billy started taking pictures him daggers. He have to suppose I am stupid, or just really unobservant. Unobservant a swan, ha, what I don't recognize, Charlie continued, swirling the liquid in his whiskey glass, is how they may recognize. Carlyle sighed loudly. In comes each individual's interest as he took a step away from his role by using the hearth. My brothers and sisters had been present too. Emmett stood along with his fingers wrapped around Rosalie in the back of the loveseat wherein Bella and I have been seated. On the other couch, Jasper became wedged in among Alice and Esme. Sure contributors of the Quileute tribe, Carlyle explained, his gaze constant on Charlie, have been aware about what we re for a while. How? Carlyle shrugged. Old legends and superstition. Their ancestors were terrorized as soon as with the aid of our kind. It affected them enough that they persisted to bypass down the tail. Charlie's eyes landed on my face, and his lips pursed. Aside from your circle of relatives, are there every other correct immortals out there? I nodded. There may be another own family in Alaska, however they are attempting to be inconspicuous like us. Nobody has any memories to inform about the best men, due to the fact they do not go out of their way to trouble other people. He nodded and took any other swig of his drink. Makes experience. The news usually best covers the scum. So, need I not allow on that I know, or do you need me to mention something? It might probably be higher in case you didn't, Carlyle said. Our dating with the tribe is delicate. You understand they don't specifically like us. I kinda figured that, yeah. They more likely to leave us to our business if we preserve a low profile. In the event that they discovered out you knew about us, it might simplest enhance suspicion and problem. Very well. Charlie nodded, so I hold my mouth close then. I will do that. He commenced gnawing at his lip once more, his expression pensive. I understand things are not remarkable among you and Jake, Edward. Not particularly, I agreed. Proper. I bet now I apprehend why. Still, you have to probably know that he became getting a bit antsy nowadays. I assume he thinks Bella is like you guys now, even though I instructed him over and over that she's just similar to she's continually been. I caught him pacing in the kitchen at one factor. He's paranoid. It wouldn't wonder me in case you bumped into him sometime quickly. Thanks for the warning. I will endure it in mind. What caution? Bella demanded softly. She checked out her father, and then at me, earlier than repeating the motion. It is nothing, I assured her. She wasn't shopping for it. Edward, what is occurring? I swear it's not anything. Charlie became simply telling me that that Jacob is a little frightened for the time being. All of the more cause to stay away, Jasper cut in, searching at Bella pointedly. She blushed under his gaze, however nodded in settlement. As long as we don't motive trouble and keep our distance, I am positive the Quileutes will hold him below manipulate. It changed into a remedy while the verbal exchange eventually deviated far from the wolves. Jacob Black became the closing individual I wanted to think about. After he completed along with his first glass of hearth whiskey, Charlie declined another, however usual a lager. We would stock the fridge with cans the day earlier than. He spluttered awkwardly when Esme surpassed him his present a fishing sonar system from all of us apologizing for now not having whatever to offer and go back. My mother waved it off, pretty happy regardless, just like the rest folks. As Alice had expected when we would bought it, the chief cherished the existing, and spent a very good 20 minutes immersed in the preparation guide. Bella and I left him to it, and went outside, wherein we built a snowman. It most effective took 5 minutes to do, on the grounds that collecting the raw cloth was far faster whilst you were blessed with amazing pace. Bella didn't even must wrap up for the event rather, she without a doubt saw it a thermal spell to preserve herself warm. Whilst Alice brought the carrot out, Bella spent a further 5 minutes ribbing her for wondering we would allow our snowman to stay his existence with a mutated nostril. My sister possibly might have blushed if she'd been human, and stuck her tongue out at the teasing girl. You don't want the alternative snowman to make amusing of him, do you? I chortled. Oh, shut up. Alice chuckled, screwing the carrot into the pinnacle. It does not matter if all of the rest have mutated noses too. Except, it's just selective breeding, they may be no longer honestly mutants. That turned into the candy speak me. After tons dispute, we determined to call the snowman Norris. Individually, I idea he deserved an extra majestic name than that, for he had a totally regal air about him, together with his strong nose, his strong stomach, and his black pinnacle hat. Bella argued, claiming that she failed to need our introduction to get above himself, and that an extra humble name could prevent his head from swelling. Later, we played charades inside the living room. By means of that factor, Charlie was onto his 1-3 can, and although he wasn't under the influence of alcohol, he turned into actually looser than he would typically were around my family. Emmett and Jasper had been proving to be first-rate competition as they knocked again glass after glass. The initial impact was giddiness, and that they moved and spoke a little more unexpectedly than they need to have. I would have argued, most effective, in his merry state, the most up-to-date human in on our act determined the entirety rather funny, in particular whilst it turned into Emmett's turn to mime to his team Rosalie, Jasper, and Alice. He were given a 1920s Broadway display, so, without a moment's hesitation, he broke out right into a full-on faucet dance habitual, his toes transferring so quick that they were a blur to Charlie's eyes. The man gawked for a moment, eyes bugging, before throwing his head again with a chortle. I should see the humor too. Emmett was an ape, a faucet dancing ape. Eleanor Powell. Jasper squealed, leaping in his seat like an excited college woman. I suppressed a cackle. Bill Robinson, shouted Alice. Charlie Atkins, cried Rosalie. Fred Astaire. Emmett pointed at Jasper right now, and gave him the thumbs up, earlier than he caught out his behind, wiggling it vigorously, and thrust out his chest, cupping his arms over his pectorals. Female. Girl. Lolitha. Scarlet female. Call female. Courtesan. Female of negotiable affections. Fille de joie. Jasper screamed, pulling at his hair. Emmett shook his head furiously. Jasper, Rosalie growled, poking him inside the shoulder, allow us to get a phrase in, might you? He could not manipulate his mouth, though, thanks to the dragon's blood binge which likely wasn't even over yet, and his thoughts become some distance much less clever than it commonly would were. As a result, he persisted to spout off garbage and wrong answers, having quickly forgotten that he become meant to be looking for something linking to Fred Astaire. Concubine, commercial sex employee, full-frame masseuse, escort, fallen girl, what the hell is going on in that head of yours? Alice freaked. Lady of easy distinctive feature. Scarlet girl, female of the, Emmett pointed, and nodded his head. Girl, Rosalie clarified. He nodded again. Woman be correct. Yeah. Dumb launched himself from the couch, into the hands of Dumber, who lifted him off the ground in party. Bella and Charlie have been leaning towards each other for aid, laughing hysterically at the spectacle. I love you, man. Emmett cheered. That changed into notable, I love you too, Em. Hey, Rosalie said, status up, arms on hips, I am the only who were given the answer. Should not you be telling me how notable I am? I would not fear, Rose. My sister grew to become to examine me, her forehead furrowing. I nodded my head to my whooping brothers. Making inappropriate declarations of affection is seemingly ordinary for intoxicated men. She rolled her eyes, chuckling notwithstanding her infection. Sister, dearest, Rosalie, come on, let us go have what they may be having. Apparently, the world is a funnier place to be while you and fool. Alice nodded and jumped up from the sofa, linking her arm with my golden-haired sister S, earlier than the two of them skipped away into the kitchen. I drove Charlie home at 8. There has been no way he could have been capable of get back alone. First off, his morals would by no means have allowed it, and, secondly, his reflex abilities have been critically suffering. Why recognize, he slurred, as he wobbled via the front door. Why are all right, Edward. Why roll NOOOOHWK bunch. Thanks Charlie. He pointed to my wrist. Love it. The undercover agent band, I responded, searching down at the present Bella had offered me. Warm temperature regarded to seep through my frame in the one's next few seconds, and my lips spread mechanically, till the corners were practically touching my eyes. I love it. What higher manner is there to ensure she is secure? You up. I chuckled quietly as Charlie hiccuped, and left quickly afterwards, dashing away, return to the house, wherein Bella would be looking forward to me. She become nowhere in sight although after I back, and that I could not hear her heartbeat. Bella, I panicked, zipping from room to room. She's out flying. Esme informed me from her bedroom, in which she was trying out the magic artwork package, portray a vase of tulips. Carlyle resided nearby, sprawled out on the bed along with his head in a book, magical magnifying glass in hand. Find her, my mom informed, before she receives uninterested in looking ahead to you. I will, thank you. And with that, I raced lower back downstairs, grabbing my new firebolt from beside the Christmas tree, earlier than zooming outside and shooting up, leaving the floor underneath. The clouds had been thick overhead, blockading out the moon and stars. Once I'd won sufficient altitude, I began scanning the panorama, which, to my eyes, was painted in white, deep purples, and indigo. The forest stretched out into the space, over hills and cliffs, obscuring my view of the region. Hovering in mid-air, I closed my eyes, lending all my concentration to looking for Bella via sound on my own. There has been nevertheless no hint of her heartbeat. I was out of variety. I couldn't even determine the wings of birds or the hooves of animals as the wind surged round my ears. They should all have returned to their shelters, keen to escape the cold. The air whistled as I sped off. The best mind I ought to pay attention had been those of my family, just over a mile away. I searched farther, searching for some other thoughts to connect with. My experience of odor became useless in the air Bella need to be flown downwind. Then, all at once, an photograph permeated my mind. Extensive, round clearing overrun with white, yellow and pink wildflowers, their heads searching up in worship of the sun. As quickly because it got here, the memorized photo dwindled. I grinned widely, before turning east, expecting the imminent rendezvous. Once I reached the meadow, however, Bella became nowhere to be visible. The vicinity became asleep underneath the soft white veil of snow, and would remain so for a while. I touched down inside the lifeless center, immediately conscious that the object of my affections were here earlier. She'd left her heady scent at the back of. It reduced immediately alongside the middle, from one side to the opposite, the path finishing on the timber. Strange. I stopped unexpectedly as my eyes stuck on a yellow put-up-it notice pinned to a branch. The picture brought on my breath prevent, earlier than choosing up a second later, its tempo tons quicker than every day, due to an unexpected burst of exhilaration. Once I read the phrases written upon it, an extensive grin unfolded throughout my face. Discover me if you can mushroom ravioli. I threw again my head and laughed loudly. A treasure hunt. Become that what we were gambling. To me, a vampire, this was a completely appetizing prospect. I wondered how lengthy it would take to get to Port Angeles on a firebolt. Truly no extra than 10 minutes, I predicted. It'd take handiest account of seconds for an apparating witch. All right, Bella, I chuckled, swinging my leg back over the broom, I will play along. The flight to Bella Italia became extraordinary. Whizzing over the floor at great speeds was exhilarating enough, however, to surge through the air at an identical velocity, the world rushing with the aid of under, became not anything short of astounding. I ought to recognize more and more, with each passing minute, why Bella became always so underwhelmed by way of speedy vehicles. The streets, all of which have been illuminated by way of the orangey glow of the lighting, have been deserted, the locals tucked away indoors for the holiday. I scanned the region to make sure it became secure, and searched through all the mines in range. While I was sure that no person might see me, I landed at the roof of the eating place, my eyes flying in each path as I stuck Bella's scent again. The next clue became taped to a growing air vent. I snatched at it at once, hit via any other surge of excitement. The notice fluttered towards the light breeze, and my coronary heart swelled to double its length as I read the message. I dream of you. Inside 10 minutes, I used to be returned in Forks, quietly easing open Bella's window. My vampiric imaginative and prescient made finding the subsequent notice a easy assignment. I moved silently over the floorboards as I went to retrieve it. This clue became a little much less apparent than the opposite had been. Its study. The quest ends at the start. At the start, I whispered, pursing my lips. Did that imply she wanted me to return to the meadow, or the residence? That failed to appear too healthy, given that my witch changed into a touch extra creative than that. The start, I stated once more, this time, knowledge the riddle which means. After carefully folding up the observe, and shifting it to my pocket, I set off another time, into the nighttime sky, my thoughts targeted on Forks High School, and the lady awaiting me there. I could not see through the cafeteria home windows when I landed. They were frosted, just like the panes UD location in a bathroom for privateness. They were softly illuminated via a glow from inside. Music filled my ears, a slow and gentle composition. I regarded the soothing notes of Clair de Lune, listening in marvel as my legs moved of their very own volition, pulling me toward the noise and the beautiful accompanying heartbeat. The door became unlocked, naturally. My breath caught in my lungs as I silently pushed it open. Bella stood inside the center of the candlelit room, barefoot, her eyes closed as she swayed softly to the melody, which became coming from a charmed piano up with the aid of the western wall. The desks have been stacked against the perimeters of the room, growing a huge space for her to bounce in, no longer that she became making full use of it. She changed into wearing a white, strapless maxi get dressed. The cloth fitted snugly round her chest, however draped extra loosely under the empire line, swaying as she did. I might in no way visible anything so lovely in all my lifestyles. She looked so fantastically peaceful, like an angel. Even the sound of her buzzing become heavenly, so much so that I definitely couldn't deliver myself to announce my presence. I simply stood at the sidelines and watched in wonder, not able to trust that she become mine. Whilst Debussy changed by my own composition, but her lullaby I had to step in. I softly referred to as her call, and she or he iced over, starting her eyes a 2D later. She failed to display any sign of embarrassment unusual for her as she greeted me with a warm and smooth smile. We exchanged no phrases as I approached, and the silence continued as I took her in my arms, stretching on and into our dance. She rested her head on my shoulder, her face grew to become inwards, so that her heat breath blew gently onto my neck every time she exhaled. Keep for the burn in my throat, I used to be absolutely content. For half of an hour, that was all we did, sluggish dance in circles, by no means straying from the center of the room, neither folks uttering a unmarried syllable. The only good-sized sounds had been those created by means of the piano, Bella's coronary heart, our featuring as they moved over the tiles, and our relaxed, synchronized breathing. At one factor, she dropped her defend, remembering what I would said after the Quidditch World Cup, about how she must abandon occlumency as a Christmas gift. Her mind were quiet and non-violent, in tune with the ecosystem. They did not definitely stray any in addition than the existing, and what she became feeling as we moved together. Subsequently, but, she did wonder approximately how I might found the sport. I liked it very tons, I advised her softly. It became amusing, especially for the reason that I am a hunter through nature. I need to congratulate you for your spontaneity. People rarely manipulate to surprise me. I am glad you enjoyed it. It became amusing for me too. In which have been you while you showed me the meadow. Inside the wooded area, multiple miles from the house, where the bushes were thick. I felt you looking for me, and I would already placed all the clues by the time you arrived lower back. It most effective took 5 minutes. So when you started out for the meadow, I came right here an installation. The piano, borrowed from the tune department, and the get dressed, which appears adorable on you by using the way. She smiled against my neck. Alice, of direction. She changed into tipsy when I requested. I think she very nearly fainted. I laughed, earlier than adjusting my head in order that I may want to see her face. When the enjoyment subsided, some other wave of gentle emotion swept over me. Staring deeply into her chocolate eyes, I said, I can agree with you did all this for me. You need to recognize with the aid of now that I would do something for you. I nodded sternly. I recognize. It is just you are dancing. She tilted her head back, allowing me to support her frame, and laughed as much as the ceiling. Voluntarily, I brought, strengthening my factor. I am, are not I. Sure, that is absolutely out of man or woman for you. I am conflicted as to whether or not I should deliver you to the health facility. She aimed a playful smack to my chest. I stuck her hand and held it there, injecting a nice anxiety into the ecosystem, which simplest deepened as our eyes held one another's. After a few moments, but, it became damaged through my Bella, as she reached up on her tiptoes to kiss me. It was half beyond 10 whilst the two of us activate back to her house. We flew, in place of apparating, and soared up through the nighttime sky until we were above the cloud bank. Up there, her white dress illuminated by means of the silvery glow of the moon and stars, Bella in reality did appearance ethereal. The misty skyscape turned into so exceptional to behold, the artificial light from under completely blocked with the aid of the white spanning blanket, that we dawdled a little, prolonging the journey. I have thought to use a thermal spell in bed a long time in the past, Bella informed me whilst we in the end made it again. I needed to trust that. It was pleasant not to have to be separated from her through plenty of thin layers and a quilt. I arched my frame round hers as she laid along with her back to me, buzzing her lullaby. 15 minutes after our arrival, she turned into a sleep. 20 minutes later, she became Speak Me, mumbling my name and something about carrots. I had every purpose of staying with her until she woke up, however that plan went out the window when 4 aggravating voices echoed in my head, annoying my attention. Eddie. My eyes bulged. What the? Eddie. Eddie. You up there, dude. Emmett. I hissed, too low to wake Bella. What within the blazes do you need? What's up? He huffed mentally. Is that any way to talk to your adoring brother? Come on, Eddie. I clenched my jaw and swung from the bed, flitting to the window and lifting it open. Might you stop calling me that? I demanded, looking down at my 4 siblings. The girls had been sat on their spouses' shoulders, they all waving up at me. What turned into abnormal, on top in their apparent intoxicated situation, changed into the fact that their irises possessed a better saturation of color. Rosalie's eyes, for example, which had been a tender violet a few hours ago, were now a deep purple. Jasper's eyes have been a steel silver, in place of gray. Emmett's were an unnatural color of blue. He appeared ghostly. Alice's, funnily sufficient, have been intensified return to gold, due to the fact that their regular coloration hung somewhere between inexperienced and hazel. Come on, Grumpy, Alice whispered, swaying to and fro, her eyelids drooping slightly. We've got masses and plenty and lots and plenty. I gently banged my head against the wall. And masses and lots and plenty of stuff to do. Like, she threw her head back and giggled. Rosalie did the same. Earlier than she looked at me and held up an outsized hat, Bella's headless hat to be particular. We have a cunning plan. Emmett and Jasper vibrated against the shadows, urgent their arms to their faces to muffle the sound of their laughter. I sighed at my drunken brothers and sisters. What form of foxy plan? Duh, concept Rosalie. We're going to move freak out the wolves. Even though my sister's words rang as clear as a bell in my head, I couldn't deliver myself to simply accept them. I stared blankly at the group beneath for what felt like minutes, unable to trust that every person might be so silly. Once I in the end realized that they had been resolved on their plot, my eyes flashed extensive with fury, and my lips curled returned over my tooth. Ooh, Jasper mocked, a person's were given his panties in a twist. Emmett snorted. Oh, man, Edward in lace. Horny. The mental photograph he dispatched me driven me a step in the direction of the edge, and it took everything I had no longer to fling myself down there and give him every other true kick where it hurt. You are an imbecile, I growled. At least I do not put on lace. Come on, Edward, Alice pouted, batting her eyelashes. Come and have a few amusing with us. We aren't provoking the wolves. Okay, excellent. We will simply discover someone else to prank rather. How approximately Mike Newton? He's home for the holidays. I know how plenty you loathe the man. Please. My expression smoothed out at Alice's thought. It changed into true I severely disliked Newton. I shook my head. We should not. You need to, Alice sang. You really need to. That doesn't change the truth. We should not, I smirked. Of root it does. If you stated that whenever we desired something inside the beyond, we would have left a path of corpses at the back of us any place we went. Yeah, however that is exceptional, she grinned. We are not going to injure all of us physically. We are simply going to inflict some extreme psychological pain. You suggest when you inebriated, I chuckled. She flashed an impish grin in response. Ultimately, I gave in. The concept of pranking Newton was just too delicious to skip up on, and considering Bella's past misdemeanors, I doubted she would begrudge me this one tiny satisfaction. On top of that, Jasper changed into using his persuasive powers to fill me with enthusiasm. I would blame him. Considering that my plans were interrupted, I determined to utilize Bella's present, and positioned one of the rectangular mirrors on her bedside desk, adjusting the angle to make sure I had the ideal view of her face. Afterwards, I made my departure, but not earlier than I pressed a light kiss to the witch's head. Bella breathed out a smooth sigh. She must had been falling into a deeper sleep now, because she failed to communicate again. Every vampire clapped me on the lower back as my feet thudded towards the earth, satisfied to have me on board. From there, we raced far from the house, back off the road and into town. I'd been looking forward to our travels to take us to Mike's domestic, however then Alice's vision darted into my head, and she or he led our group in an alternate direction, cackling like a hag as she did so, her golden eyes crazed. As we neared Fork's basic faculty, I distinguished 4 new voices, the acquainted ones of Mike Newton, Jessica Stanley, Tyler Crowley, and Lauren Mallory. Their time away hadn't matured them any, yet like most people, they had quick realized the characteristics fashionable among college students. They stood just a little way into the forest in the back of the school, sharing a spliff, at the same time as discussing politics and literature, despite the fact that none possessed any real information of the topics. "Oh my gosh," Jessica spewed, "I am analyzing a module on 19th century literature, right, and that I swear, I am so serious about Hardy. His aesthetics are excellent. Tess of the Dear Bevels is now my all-time favorite e-book. God, it's stupid. Have not even made it beyond the 0.33 web page. Sincerely," said Lauren, faking enthusiasm. "I'll take a look at it out of the library next time I go. Now not." After taking a long draw from the joint, Mike surpassed it directly to Jessica, who smiled and thanked him. She inhaled lightly, and stored her expression constant, even though, secretly, she becomes simply repulsed through marijuana. "I hate these items. It burns like hell," I laughed under my breath. If most effective she knew. "Hi there, has everyone visible anything of Bella?" Mike inquired. I was clutching the bark of a small spruce on the time. What I noticed within the boy's head prompted the timber to splinter underneath the sheer force of my hold close. "You would assume she'd be lower back for the holidays." "Swan," drawled Lauren. Are we able to please no longer talk approximately that caught up by Och? You re-killing my excessive, Mike." I without delay snatched the hat off Rosalie and filled it onto my head. "Sweet," thought Emmett, a manic grin forming on his face as he took in my headless parent. "You go get Lacey." I used to be too indignant to react to my brother's teasing. All my fury was channeled towards the humans. Jessica turned into guffawing at Lauren's foul statement, and the men were too busy stripping the fable Bella they had constructed in their minds. I crept in the direction of them through the bushes. They failed to pay attention or see my approach, for his or her senses were some distance too dull, in spite of the broad sensory consequences of the cannabis. God most effective knows why Cullen wanted her. Perhaps he's blind, Jessica laughed. "Quite the alternative, you stupid cow," Rosalie tousled mentally. "Or determined. Perhaps he found out something we failed to. I bet she's filthy in the sack." Tyler grinned to himself on the idea whilst I seethed. Jessica and Lauren misunderstood his smile, taking encouragement from it, and, thus, persevered to spout their verbal diarrhea. There has been no hint of the reluctance I would skilled in advance as I pulled to a halt 10 meters from the organization. In fact, I was not anything brief of overjoyed whilst all of them tensed in fright, alerted with the aid of the loud crack I created after I purposefully snapped a stick underfoot. What became that?" Lauren stuttered. They scanned the vicinity, which proved as a substitute needless. I moved some meters closer, final low to the floor, and discovered any other twig. Snap. The 4 gasped and jumped back. That became my cue. The ladies shrieked in fear, grabbing onto each other for consolation. "What the hell? Concept Mike. I groaned once more, transferring out from behind a twisted tree, fingers held out before me like a zombie. The air packed with 4 piercing screams as I slowly started out trudging closer to them. It is headless," cried Tyler. "Oh my God, it's headless." His scholars dilated as he chanced to short-observe the spliff among his fingertips. "Okay, so it is bad grass. This is all." The boy threw his joint onto the floor, no longer interested in the psychedelic drug. Mike shoved him forwards, and commenced screaming orders for him to kill it. Even as the ladies trembled in worry at the back, Tyler grabbed a thick branch from the ground, and held it up like a baseball bat, ready to swing. "Kill it, damn it!" Mike demanded. "Kill it, kill it!" Tyler shouted again, absolutely incredulous. "I don't know if you've observed, you frickin' moron, but a decapitated zombie does not qualify as alive. I don't assume a stick is going to do a whole lot appropriate on this scenario, do you?" My ears stuck Emmett's muffled snort from someplace in the back of. As the next round of screams pierced the air, I deserted my sluggish tempo and pounced forwards. "Kill!" Tyler reflexively threw the branch at my chest. I batted its effects out of my manner, inflicting it to clatter towards a nearby tree trunk. The boy flip-tailed right now, precisely like his buddy, Newton, and commenced his sprint in the direction of the threshold of the forest, too terrified to watch for the girls, all sorts of chivalry now abandoned. Lauren and Jessica, in the meantime, were far too panicked to note the many roots protruding up via the dust, and persisted to lose their footing in their tries to scramble away. I shouldn't have taken such pleasure of their worry, but it felt immensely pleasurable to finally have my revenge on the malicious blonde and her faced crony. UNHHHHHHH. They launched one very last duet of horrified shrieks, earlier than they ultimately broke freed from the sinister woodland collectively, and pelted away toward the main street. Now not a 2D later, the silence exploded, giving beginning to a raucous refrain of howls and hyena-like laughter. The hat slipped off my head as I doubled over, barking out my delight at the sight of my brothers and sisters. And that turned into how we remained for the next half of hour. The others were too giddy from the dragon's blood to transport. On every occasion they tried, they simply fell approximately laughing once more, onto the dusty ground. In the long run, due to the fact laughing whilst standing was certainly impossible for them, I had to encourage my brothers and sisters to crawl their way out of the woodland on palms and knees, a procedure which took a large amount of time. They propped themselves up against the bushes and persevered with their snicker suits, whilst I ran back to the house to retrieve the Volvo. I spent the entire run not looking wherein I used to be going, no longer that brought about a trouble for me. I used to be too busy watching Bella. She wore the trace of a grin. The sight of it reinforced my personal happiness, as constantly, and I quickly became absolutely engrossed by it. My eyes did not see the street as I drove lower back via the snow to gather the others, because I did not have the power to pull them far away from Spy Band. I even became the volume up as loudly as it may cross, because the sound of Bella's respiration was especially soothing. It supplied the equal impact that a few human beings might probably get from listening to windpipe track, or the excessive frequency whistles of dolphins. Quickly, the snow began falling extra closely, constructing into what ought to nearly be described as a snowfall, the wind rushing against the auto windows, locking the frosty, white powder in a violent dance with the night time. By the point I pulled up subsequent to the primary faculty, my brothers and sisters have been nearly completely hid via the snow. The best elements of them that remained exposed were their lips, because the force in their persevered laughter blew the snow far from their mouths. I helped the hooting snowmen by means of two into the automobile. Allison rose, I really slung over every shoulder and threw in, however the boys, I dragged with the aid of the arms. They did not protest. Language turned into beyond them by that point. BPOV. That year's Christmas became one of the satisfactory I might ever had. The days following it were full of just as a good deal of laugh and happiness. Edward informed me all about the mischievous antics he'd partaken inside the preceding night. A ordinary individual probably would have been mad at what he and the others had put the people through inside the wooded area. But, had never been ordinary, and, consequently, discovered the entirety absolutely hilarious. It hadn't brought on any permanent damage. Tyler, Mike, Lauren and Jessica had all decided that it turned into both the end result of horrific capsules, or that they had been pranked. That they had reached this conclusion upon realizing that a headless zombie could in no way be able to produce the noises that Edward did, what with the dearth of a mouth in every aspect. Their doubt, of root, didn't lead them to any much less anxious afterwards. I would been completely awaiting, upon arriving at the Cullen mansion on the 26th of December, to find 4 hungover vampires. That regarded probable after what Bertie Bigwig had informed us about the results of too much dragon's blood. What none of us had banked on, however, was that the vampires would remain in their drunken kingdom for days on give up, but they did, because their bodies used up the magical fluid so slowly. The end result of that become 3 days well worth of facet-splitting enjoyment. On day of being underneath the have an effect on, Emmett, Jasper, Alice, and Rosalie had a slow race. This entailed every vampire climbing at the back of the wheel of an automobile, and using down a mile road, one which became rarely used. The winner become the man or woman who got here ultimate. It changed into hilarious to look the appearance of concentration etched onto each of their faces as they crawled along at snail pace. After 75 meters, Alice and Rosalie deserted their efforts and hit the pedal, leaving a trail of dust behind them, consistent with Edward that they had decided to race to a few difficult-to-understand region in Idaho. Emmett and Jasper, but, stuck with it to the cease, the most important vampire in his Jeep, and his brother within the Volvo, both hunched over their steerage wheels, licking their lips determinedly. Emmett won, and started sweet-speaking his behemoth automobile shortly afterwards. There has been a whole lot singing involved in the drunken antics too. Alice and Rose, on their go back from Idaho, introduced with them a karaoke machine. I have in no way laughed a lot in my life as I did upon hearing the lovely blonde and her husband duet to Sonny and Cher. As I would already located, the vampires had been rather naughty whilst drunk. At one factor, Jasper, instead referred to as the Sly Cupid, determined it be a laugh to control the emotions of the residence's inhabitants. First, he targeted Carlisle and Esme, proper even as I was sat between the two on the couch. I barely knew what to suppose while the motherly vampire, who I would in no way deem to be one for public displays, began eyeing her husband with a look of outright lust. Even the health practitioner became powerless. He growled at her licentiously, even as his sons Jasper and Emmett sat sniggering at the opposing sofa. Then it changed into my turn, and that I sooner or later understood why the vampires had failed so abysmally to control themselves. I practically attacked Edward, as he did me, nearly absolutely unaffected by way of the remark coming from his brothers. Sure, it truly is right, caress her neck, Jasper advised. Now slowly move your hands, decrease. I do not know how typically I thank the heavens for Edward's strength of mind that night time. In 1 second of restraint, he dove far from me like a bullet, right through the glass wall and go into reverse into the river. It become the second one time I might had to magically restore the window that week, so it turned into a fortunate aspect for the Cullens that I occurred to be a which dozens of Edward-shaped holes would possibly entice attention. At least I failed to turn out to be bare in front of his siblings, even though, and we finally located why Jasper had been so reluctant to percentage with us the memories of his bourbon days. He turned into a beast. In spite of the entirety, I couldn't get too mad at him. He turned into the cause, in spite of everything, that I was capable of go watch the arrows play against the Carfilly catapults. Originally, Edward had intended on accompanying me, however he cautioned that I take Charlie as a substitute, due to the fact the game changed into a certain way to boom my father's appreciation for the mystical world. Certain sufficient, he became right. Charlie adored Quidditch, or even subscribed himself to a wizarding mag at one of the join-up cubicles outside the stadium. We went to the financial institution directly afterwards to transform US greenbacks into an appropriate foreign money, in order that he be able to pay the owl with every delivery. After he returned domestic, I apparated instantly over to the Cullen mansion, ready to regale the vampires with the day's events. The arrows had received with a 50-factor lead, catapulting themselves into third area within the British League. However, when Edward greeted me inside, I was distracted by a chain of high groans coming from the subsequent floor up. My fiancé chuckled darkly under his breath and nodded to the staircase. Move, see for yourself. When I driven again the door to the second-floor bathroom, I had to clap a hand to my mouth on the sight that met me. All 4 of his brothers and sisters had been knelt by way of the bath, every with their head fully submerged. The floor of the water become protected with floating ice cubes, a few smaller than others, as though they were inside the process of melting. I looked at Edward questioningly. The dangle over has eventually arrived, he whispered. It started approximately an hour when you left for the fit. Before everything, all of them complained of a slight headache, but it escalated quickly after into complete on migraines. Further, it seems that consuming the blood of fireplace respiratory creatures causes our body temperature to upward push, however it occurs step by step, and relies upon entirely on how a lot blood is fed on. All 4 of them had been measuring in at 80 ranges earlier than we got their heads within the bath. That is probably bloodless for a human, However, for a vampire, it's a fever. Why are you whispering? I laughed loudly. All of a unexpected, the heads of the 4 soaking vampires snapped up out of the water, their eyes right away finding mine. SSSSSSSSSSSSH. They chorused, right away, after which, they all released agonized groaning sounds and gripped their dripping heads. Edward shot me an amused appearance, which became really supposed to mention it really is why. Ow! Alice whimpered, her voice barely audible. Ow! 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 Never once more, Jasper whispered, massaging his temples. After which all 4 plunged their heads back under the surface of the water, wherein they could stay for the relaxation of the day. The following day, Alice, Jasper, Rosalie, and Emmett might be determined sprawled out in the living room. Their migraines had diminished to lighter thudding headaches, however they had been nonetheless torpid, and laid like the slumbering useless for hours on end, completely refusing to move. Edward and that I used the time to complete our homework. Even as I slaved over an essay at the methodology of wand done human to animal transfiguration, Edward busied himself with his divination homework, and flew out on his firebolt, whizzing above the clouds wherein he'd have a clean view of the heavens. Whilst our assigned paintings turned into in the end completed, we reverted to our earlier mission of making copies of all my important memories, which we saved adequately away for destiny use. We went through the whole lot from that first day inside the cafeteria, all the way through the maximum romantic scenes in our tale. The maximum uncomfortable memory for Edward changed into possibly the biology lesson, when he spent the hour directing hateful glances in my path. He perked up a bit after I tried to inject some humor, or even laughed as I stood by way of memory Edward's facet, whispering into his ear about how he have to prevent being so cantankerous. He even joined in, and advised himself, in a totally stern voice, that he wished an attitude adjustment. It changed into days until our go back to Hogwarts while we made our last trip into the Pensieve. The Hogwarts dormitory materialized around us, where my beyond self became tossing and delivering bed. The eyes, I mumbled. The eyes. Within the next bed throughout, Hermione sat bolt up proper, awoke by using my sleep speaking. She rubbed her eyes tiredly and slid away from bed. Bella, she stated lowly, giving reminiscence me a light shake. Awaken. I gasped conscious at her touch, my limbs flying out reflexively, in witches who turned into huh. Bella, are you all right? She requested. You were having that dream once more. That is the 5th time now. Oh yeah. I flopped back off in opposition to the bed, strolling a hand through my hair. I am very well. I just desire I knew what it supposed. Why do not you tell me approximately it? My pal advised. It might assist. I shrugged. To be sincere, Hermione, there is now not a great deal to tell. I don't see a face after I sleep. It's simply the eyes, like I am getting a near up or something. There ought to be a motive why you redreaming approximately the identical thing even though. There need to be some thing special approximately them. Oh, there is, memory me confident her. They now not like ordinary eyes. I felt Edward demanding beside me. Sneaking a glance at his face, I noticed that he was both absolutely immersed inside the conversation, and hopeful looking. He licked his lips in anticipation, his gaze by no means straying from the 2 16-year-olds. They golden, I confessed. The maximum stunning gold you could possibly consider. I see them nearly whenever I nod off, and I've honestly no idea why. They so severe, like they someway have the capability to see beyond the whole thing bodily like they are looking into my soul. And you've certainly no concept in any way who they could belong to. Hermione puzzled. Whether or not it is a female or a person. It's virtually a man, I responded with a bit of luck. I can tell with the aid of his brow. For a second, there has been silence. My buddy pursed her lips, considering my revelation, whilst I nervously awaited her conclusion. Perhaps this individual is your soul mate, she shrugged ultimately. Memory me arched an eyebrow skeptically. My soul mate, who are you and what have you finished with Hermione Granger? The two laughed quietly beneath their breath. It is probably genuine. You in no way understand. If it is no longer that, then maybe it's a caution of chance. Perhaps the golden-eyed man goes to threaten you in the destiny. Or maybe it doesn't suggest anything at all. Come now, Bella, Hermione chided. You recognize in addition to I do how critical our dreams occasionally may be. You were beginning to sound like Trelawney. She threw lower back her head and snorted loudly. I am no longer pronouncing that they usually are, however I don't think it is realistic to definitely dismiss them both, in particular no longer when you have the identical one over and over. She shook her head, fear progressively overtaking her countenance. No, I do not accept as true with this dream as meaningless, and, deep down, I do not think you do either. I held my breath and bit my lip, earlier than subsequently freeing a heavy sigh. You are right, I do not. After which the memory commenced fizzling round us, fading to black, before a brand new scene commenced forming to replace it. Edward slowly became to take a look at me, his eyes huge and bowled over. My heartbeat sped below the intensity of his gaze, my cheeks flushing as an end result. Why did not you assert something? He asked subsequently, after what felt like all the time. I couldn't at the beginning. No, but after that. I shrugged. I did not understand the way to approach it. How do you inform a person you dreamt of them nearly each night for a year earlier than you met them? It sounds insane, and extra than a bit obsessive. I would have believed you, he murmured, and after creeping into your room inside the beginning to look at you sleep, I would be the final man or woman inside the International to accuse you of obsession. Except, he shrugged, a glorious smile creeping onto his face, I love that you dreamt approximately me. It is one greater issue to feature to the list. Listing. What list? The list of proof proving we were supposed for every different. I grinned, and apologized for now not informing him faster. Edward asked why he hadn't heard of it earlier than in Hermione's mind. I defined to him that the dream hadn't occurred to my friend in the course of the struggle of Hogwarts, because she became so beaten with panic and the undertaking in opposition to Voldemort. In truth, it wasn't till she studied the 50-page report issued by using the prophet that she remembered what I might advised her. She'd written to me no longer long after, just to mention I told you so. However, once the thriller have been solved, it wasn't something we honestly felt the need to talk about again. Hermione had higher things to do than to turn out to be fixated on a person else's dreams and love existence. Edward standard that, and despite the fact that the smile did not drop from his face, he fast sank again into silence, watching as a thick emerald woodland materialized. We were again in Forks, and it was twilight the only following my first day at the new faculty. Talto became sat on the trunk of a toppled tree, watching me whilst I paced frantically from side to side. My expression was a combination of anger and fear. Arg! I exclaimed, throwing my palms into the air. Vampires! Vampires! In Forks! And now not just that. Vampires in high school. I don't recognize. What could vampires be doing in high college? Edward chuckled beside me. I suggest it's no longer precisely very inconspicuous as it. However, on the other hand, the loss of life toll in Forks isn't exactly excessive. So if they not the usage of school as a way of picking out their publications, what within the name of Merlin's beard are they doing there? What is the enchantment? Talto gave a hoot of confusion, and continued to observe me tempo. Ultimately, I slumped down next to him, and launched a tired sigh. I don't get it. It does not make any feel. Vampires are nomads by means of nature. They do not live in households, and they really don't input a scientific career. My head fell into my arms, and that I launched a humorless snigger. Maybe they are lazy vampires. Maybe they favor to steal donated blood. Arg! Did I point out the reality that one among them severely has it in for me? Edward stiffened, as did Talto. I kid you now not. His name is Edward Cullen, and he spent the entire biology lesson evident in my direction. And it wasn't simply an I hate you glare, both it changed into a I want to sink my tooth via your skin and drain the existence from you form of glare. Who does he assume he is? Edward sighed beside me, his expression loaded with guilt and disappointment. Howdy, I stated softly, lacing my hand along with his. You didn't hurt me. I scared you. I brought about you physical ache. I think that quite much makes us even. We each seemed returned at reminiscence, me, who now resembled a deer stuck in headlights. However, why would he take a look at me like that when while he spends nearly every day surrounded by people, except? I groaned, my arms falling again into my hands. Extraordinary, I am his singer. No wonder he desired to kill me. Talto flapped his wings furiously, hooting in panic. I touched a finger to his feathers, stroking them a good way to soothe him. Don't worry. I am nonetheless alive, even though I don't exactly understand why. Edward have to killed me by way of now if he wanted my blood that badly. And it is no longer as though he is too full to do it. His eyes have been flat black. And then there's the matter of his gift. I do not know exactly what he can do, however it is clear he is a legilimens of some kind. I could experience him looking to get inside my head. I am wondering if the others in his own family have powers. My beyond self sighed once more, rubbing her temples in and tried to relieve her stress. A circle of relatives no longer a coven. What kind of vampires belong to a family? The reminiscence shifter a 2D later, even though the putting remained the equal. Talto. Memory me exclaimed. Talto. The owl swooped down from an excessive department, landing once more on the trunk of the uprooted tree. It is him. I can consider it, however it is him. The only with the golden eyes. I might realize them everywhere, I declared excitedly. Talto stared at me in confusion. Edward Cullen. He got here back to school these days, and his irises have been gold. He is the one I've spent the past year dreaming approximately. My owl's eyes dilated as he took in my phrases. I, meanwhile, started pacing to and fro, carrying an elated smile as I did so. He had better manipulate of himself nowadays, and he become even trying to be exceptional. I must have just caught him off Shield Ultimate Week, and whilst he became hungry, too, I ponder why I see him a lot. I stopped pacing all at once, the color right now draining from my face. Talto hooted uncomfortably as the silence unfolded. I assume I think I recognize, beyond me whispered. He is a vampire, I am his singer. The desires were a warning dying by vampire. My owl, now terrified, fluttered from the trunk and onto my shoulder, where he repeatedly nibbled at my ear. But if that were it, I stated, dazed, if he had been a normal vampire, then why has he still not finished it? Properly, that a great deal I assume is apparent he is now not a regular vampire. His irises are not purple for a begin. So he is something distinct. Maybe that's cause sufficient to pray that he is not going to kill me in the end. Memory me shook her head and laughed. I may want to do not forget the frustration of that realization. I would doubted my pal's wager from the off, however that hadn't stopped me from hoping besides. After realizing the proprietor of the eyes become a vampire, I felt absolutely ridiculous and frustrated with myself for even exciting the thought. Either way, there is no manner that Hermione's romantic assumption became proper. What vampire might ever fall in love with a human? Extra importantly, how should someone as thoughts-bogglingly best as Edward Cullen fall for a few one as simple as me? Bella, Edward growled beside me, you aren't undeniable, you are biased, I pointed out. Of path I am, however that does not suggest I am incorrect. Reminiscence Bella sighed. So what will we realize, Talto? She held up a fist and checked out the owl, flicking up her thumb. One the man I've literally obsessed over for 12 months, the guy I used to be fantasizing about once I have to been head deep in homework. Edward wiggled his eyebrows at this, giving me an oh sincerely. Look, is really a vampire named Edward Cullen. To I am quite likely stated vampire-s singer, meaning stated vampire not only has to control his thirst, however also has to suffer fiery ache every time he is with me. 3 of point is accurate, that could make Edward Cullen a very excellent, and a vastly self-sacrificing vampire, one who does no longer, in fact, live to tell the tale via killing people, which appears possibly, thinking about his ordinary eye color. And 4 I think my obsession simply got a hell of plenty worse. The memory blurred in and immediately, like ink when it bleeds, and I used to be all of sudden experiencing the sensation of being thrust upwards. Edward soared out of the pensieve, and that I followed a 2D later, stumbling out into fact. I didn't have the Newton ball on me today, and due to the fact I used to be looking forward to Edward to catch me, I failed to panic upon dropping my stability. That, of direction, made my collision with the floor all the extra surprising. Oh, if I blinked in surprise, absolutely pressured. That become when I heard an angry cry of protest, preceded by using a sequence of thuds. I looked up to see the Cullen brothers wrestling a few meters away. Emmett and Jasper had Edward pinned to the floor, both attempting to force something into his mouth. Although he did the entirety he ought to resist them, he wasn't strong sufficient to tackle both at once, and inevitably lost the war. The two jumped lower back the second he swallowed, and set free a refrain of positive cheers. Mew ha ha ha, Emmett cackled sinisterly, earlier than he and his brother flashed to the open window. They appeared returned over their shoulders, and the burly vampire cried, "This is for on every occasion you laughed at us while we had been hung over." Then, they released themselves out into the black night. Edward shot to his toes, at once starting up after the men. What occurred subsequent induced my eyes to pop huge. "I am going to convey the ache," he sang, "I am going to convey the ache. And while I have achieved it as soon as with you I'll start all over again. I will tear your bones apart, and rip out your dead coronary heart. Slice off your ears with rusty shears. Because you acted clever." The air filled with the sound of his angry making a song as he bounded into the dark. It took me a second to recognize what that they had finished, however once I sooner or later did, I ended up bent over, guffawing my head off. I ran to the window quickly after, and 1-2 shifted my form, protecting my mind among animal and human. Noise exploded in my ears, and even though he changed into likely over a mile away with the aid of now, his words nonetheless echoed again to me. "I will chop off all of your fort, and stuff them up your nose. Pop out your eyes due to the fact you guys are wicked, evil bros. I am going to tug your teeth, because you gave me beef. And whilst you useless, I'll visit bed. And there'll be no greater grief." He had a totally bitter expression whilst he ultimately returned, and it took everything I had now not to burst into hysterics. "How are you?" I requested, feeling my lips twitch on the corners. "I am mad. I am mad. I am actually, really mad. My brainless brother is a jerk. Due to him I've gone berserk. So yes, I am mad. I am certainly, clearly, certainly, virtually mad." His jaw clenched with fury as his tune came to an quit, and the manner he crossed his hands, huffing with downcast eyes, advised me that he changed into possibly a touch extra than embarrassed. I didn't need Edward to sense humiliated, but at the same time, it became almost impossible to comprise my laughter. I walked over to him and slid my fingers around his waist, smiling broadly. "Edward, on the grand scale of factors, this isn't always that horrific, so that you spend the relaxation of the nighttime singing. It is able to be loads worse. Day after today, you'll probable look again on this and laugh your socks off." He frowned at that, however his grim expression gave way once I flashed him a slitty-eyed, cheesy grin, leaving in the back of most effective bashful leisure. He pouted adorably, earlier than his gaze intensified, his eyes filling with a quiet awe as they scanned my face. I used to be already absolutely dazzled before he began his subsequent song, which he brought slowly, in a low voice that became so delicious, that velvet simply didn't reduce it as a very good sufficient adjective. "Dear face that holds no sweeter smile for me, have been you now not mine, how dark the arena could be. I recognize no light above that bloodless that might update love's radiance and shine in your expensive face. Supply me your smile, the love mild to your eyes. I could not maintain a fairer paradise. Give me the proper to love you all of the even as, my global all the time, the sunshine of your smile." While he eventually finished, all I ought to do become gawk. My God, this guy changed into ideal. What music turned into that? Ah, this piece, My Pricey Bella, became written by using a fella named Frank Sinatra. Edward nodded. "Wow, I have to can help you put his track on the iPod Charlie offered me. I'd do something for you, expensive, anything. For you imply the whole thing the whole lot to me." We both burst out guffawing at precisely the same second. Impossibly, Edward's laughter sounded extra musical than it generally did. I assume he ought to have been keen to keep me smiling, because after I advised we need to make the maximum of his predicament, he agreed, and went in conjunction with the game I concocted. I'd fire a random word at him, and he'd ought to make up a song which included it as a part of the verse. He become actually as a substitute precise at it, what along with his incredible speedy mind and all. My preferred, out of all of the creations he came up with, turned into by way of far the plectrum music. He got here to the stop of one about onomatopoeia, and I applauded loudly, firing roses from my wand. Afterwards, I flipped the pages of the dictionary in my lap till I reached the P.S. Plectrum. Edward fingered his lips in notion. Handiest 3 seconds had surpassed whilst thought contemplated itself in his functions. He clapped his hands together victoriously and commenced bobbing to and fro, while pretending to shake an invisible set of maracas. I helped him out and conjured an actual pair. The tunes from most of his different songs have been authentic. This one, however, he stole from a Disney flick. I think I simply lost my plectrum. It fell into my guitar. I cannot seem to get it out now. My hand might not move in that a ways. The strings in the manner do not assist me. They inside the most awkward location. I'll go discover some other plectrum. There is probably one in my case. I lost my plec. Do. I misplaced my plec. Do. It become ever so vibrant. Tattooed on my proper knee. And on my neck. Now on every occasion I begin to play. That silly target market constantly say. Something sounds humorous. We need back our cash. Or get a new plec. We had a lot of laugh with that, and by the time his brothers returned, he couldn't appear to care less that he needed to solution each question they shot at him in music. Once in a while, when he become addressing the gruesome twosome, but, he switched languages. Upon wondering him as to why he did this, he instructed me, no civil word I choose to throw at those antisocial fools, ought to display how an awful lot I would without a doubt like to kick them within the jaw. He broke off before completing his rhyme. However I type of were given the message. He didn't want me to have to listen to his cussing, so instead, he delivered it in a way that I would not understand. How many languages do you already know, Edward? Many, he bellowed, operatically. I recognize many. The places I have been are many. I have traveled very far. All over the international. The Cullens had been all accrued in the residing room now. Carlyle, Esme, and Alice had been sat collectively on the couch, with Rosalie, Jasper and Emmett at their toes. The three at the floor all sat snickering at their brother's expense. The others, however, attempted to refrain from doing so. 100 years is truly too long time to spend all your time in one vicinity, Edward chanted, adopting a bouncy up-tempo rhythm. And there are too many cultures on this global to limit yourself to one race. I've visited. Here we move, Alice giggled. Norway, and Sweden, and Iceland, and Finland, and Germany now in one piece. Switzerland, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Italy, Turkey and Greece. Poland, Romania, Scotland, Albania, Russia, Oman. Bulgaria, Saudi Arabia, Hungary, Cyprus, Iraq, and Iran. India, Pakistan, Burma, Afghanistan, Thailand, Nepal, and Bhutan. Kampuchea, Malaysia, then Bangladesh, Asia, and China, Korea, Japan. Mexi. His song ended all at once as he and Alice shot to their fort, their smooth mood switching to frightened in a heartbeat. Alice. Jasper probed anxiously. The destiny, she replied, her eyes in no way straying from her bronze-haired brother's. It simply disappeared. I used to be all of sudden very aware of my pulse as it increased beneath my skin. Edward pulled me up from my seat and in opposition to his body, his hands winding protectively round my again. The Cullens disputed their course of action, determining quickly that Carlyle ought to do all the speak me. I certainly was hoping the wolves would be brave sufficient to apply their human forms, due to the fact there has been no manner we'd be able to explain Edward's present incapacity to talk usually. Even as the alternative persisted to converse, so speedy that the words became gibberish to my ears, I used to be too busy taking in the sounds coming from outside. I listened with my proper ears. Somewhere in the distance about a mile and a 1-2 now, I expected 8 big creatures were beating their paws in opposition to the earth, getting closer and toward us with every passing second. As I waited with bated breath for our traffic to reach, I prayed desperately that both facets would be able to keep their instincts underneath manipulate. I prayed that this would not be every other case of cat versus dog. What a waste of a prayer. EPOV. They changed in the timber to the left of the drive leading up to the house. Jacob and Sam. The others stored their dog shapes below the orders of the Alpha. My consciousness remained mostly at the chief, because his thoughts had been the most rational and supplied me with a better knowledge of the %'s intentions. They were not right here to purpose problem, and none of them believed that Bella became a vampire. After the assembly with Charlie, Jacob had informed the % of our presence in Forks, and that they had altogether reached the belief that she turned into indeed nonetheless human, for there has been no manner she could have been secure around her father had the situations been distinctive. Emmett became his head closer to the sound of their footfalls. Edward, why the hell are they here? They come to spoil our festive cheer. I spat, my sour, sing-track voice too low to be heard with the aid of our drawing near guests. Honestly, my fists clenched as I deliberated whether or no longer to reply to my brother. The inflammation his moves had provoked had flared once more the moment I might realized I must preserve my mouth shut during the %'s visit. The others, however, desired to listen my solution too. I sighed and shook my head, a little upset that I would ought to retract the sooner statement. If the Quileutes were here to reason problem, it might have provided me with an outlet for my frustration. Swallowing my delight, I sang out my explanation, maintaining the equal quiet quantity I would used previously. Sam ordered Jacob now not to visit. Once they found out of our go back. However, the puppy's depressive temper is stimulating wonderful situation. The wolves are not here to assault. They surely come to chaperone their buddy so he might also greet Bella. And then they escort him domestic. Bella shifted uncomfortably at my side. Her eyes have been centered on the floor, hidden by way of her lengthy, black lashes. Then they met mine, and that I realized that brown were changed with gold. Ah, so she'd been listening too. I lifted my hand to her cheek and stroked the skin under her dark-rimmed lion eyes, earlier than I shook my head in caution. She grasped my meaning right away, and reluctantly shifted again to a completely human form. Come on, Carlyle said when the Quileutes stopped their improve. They were stood 10 meters from the residence, looking forward to us to reply. Allow us cross-greet our visitors. We filed out onto the porch too by means of every folks standing by way of our respective partners. Hello, Edward, Seth greeted me in his ordinary cheery manner. I nodded, returned in acknowledgement. Sam comfortable a fragment the instant his eyes landed on Bella, relieved to see the smooth red tinting her cheeks. Jacob stood stiffly beside him. His face failed to display the pain that surged to lifestyles while my fiancée's brown eyes met his. He kept it contained, hidden from the sector. I, however, should hear it. Hasn't modified. She's nevertheless the same. God, why does she should be so stunning? It is like a kick to the intestine. Why could not I be miserable over some girl on the res instead? Imprinting on Leah would be higher than this. I didn't appearance down to test Bella's expression. I did not want to. I may want to see her face flawlessly via Jacob's eyes. He wouldn't were capable of rip them away even supposing he tried. Bella smiled at her friend, however it was one in all anxiousness, and it failed to touch her eyes. Jacob attempted to smile too, however it ended up searching more like a grimace. You are nevertheless human, he stated. Howdy to you too. Jacob chuckled on the teasing statement. So's, bells. It is accurate to peer you. To peer which you no longer a leech. I figured I exceptional come spherical. Charlie stated you'll be leaving again soon. I concept you will have as a minimum dropped by using at some point. Guess now not, Bella bit her lip, and I should almost see the guilt radiating off of her. I notion it might be higher this way, she said meekly. For who? For you, of Root. The mutt waved a hand in attempted nonchalance. You shouldn't have, or have you ever forgotten that I experience being made to experience miserable? Rosalie grunted musically in disgust. This is right, canine. Play on her guilt. Leah growled, crouching lower to the ground. Rattling it, Leah, thought Sam. He looked at the she-wolf with hard eyes. Relax. For a moment, absolutely everyone tensed, feeling the strain of the surroundings' growth. Seth shifted uncomfortably, while my own family and that I stood as rigid as statues. Jasper intervened, and dispatched a wave of calm over each individual, thereby easing our collective tension. Bella nonetheless seemed remorseful, evidently. I desired to inform her she'd finished not anything incorrect. I desired to tell the mutt to desist along with his manipulative strategies, however I could not. Bella took a step far away from me. A step in the direction of him. Jake, why have not you completed it yet? He asked, reducing her off. Finished what? What? The witch inhaled sharply at his tone. My arms balled in their own accord, and Jacob's expression softened as a spark of wish flickered to existence interior him. Having second mind, of course she isn't, Alice interjected. Bella is aware of who and what she desires. No one asked you, bloodsucker. In defense of his wife, a vicious hiss burst through Jasper's lips. The sound handiest served in boosting Jacob's anger. His frame shook violently as he took a step closer to my brother, welcoming the task. Behind him, Paul and Leah twisted up, their hackles status on end. Without warning, Bella leapt far away from my own family, down the porch steps and onto the grass, where she slammed into her vintage friend. She had to pound her fist towards his fingers to divert his interest far from Jasper. Jealousy exploded via my frame like hearth. I wanted so badly to run down there and snatch her back to have her far away from him, however that could best make her angry. On pinnacle of that, I wasn't willing to provoke the wolves at the same time as she become status so close to them. Now not goodbye ago, after the struggle in opposition to the newborns, the animosity I would felt in the direction of Jacob Black had dwindled. He did not deserve my anger, now not whilst all he wanted for Bella become her safety and happiness. Now, however, after the entirety we might been through, after the entirety I would come to study on account that animosity came flooding back with a vengeance. Bella was mine. I used to be hers. We had been soul pals. I was a vampire, yes. However, had I murdered a human for blood within the recent many years? No, become I soulless. Genuinely now not. Did I deal with Bella badly? By no means. Did I love her as an awful lot as he did? More. Much, a great deal greater. And, yet, even after she told him her desire, he nevertheless had the nerve to march onto our assets, decided to have one last crack at influencing her decision, the only she come to absolutely by using herself earlier than he permit her to go away and flow on. It was with that frame of mind that I regarded down upon Jacob Black. It become with that frame of thoughts that I listened to his mind, so when Bella placed her arms on his bare shoulders as she attempted to calm him down whilst her touch sent his mood flowing in a completely one-of-a-kind course, and his thoughts subsequently responded with graphic, salacious fantasies, I reacted instantly, in the only manner I may want to. A guttural snarl ripped up my throat as I locked eyes with Jacob. His narrowed in response, and he became just about to open his mouth to speak, whilst he turned into interrupted by using every other greater violent snarl from Leah. Stupid, filthy, evil, leech, she cried at me, baring her teeth. Bella's head whipped to the she-wolf, lingering for a second, before snapping in my root, her face overflowing with confusion and worry. Those feelings underwent a carnal transformation while she back her gaze to Leah and Paul, each of whom had been nevertheless having hassle controlling their tempers. Her frame, nevertheless positioned close to Jacob's, started trembling uncontrollably, its strains blurring and losing their sharpness. Via Leah's mind, I watched as Bella too curled her lips, returned over her teeth, her eyes burning with defensive fury. What happened subsequent, none folks ought to have expected. Intuition took over, simply because it continually did whenever she perceived what she taken into consideration to be a chance to my safety. All it took was one tiny fraction of time, one small slip for disaster to come raining down upon us, turning all of the international to ache and horror. Bella's eyes shimmered into molten gold as she targeted in on the wolves, who did not have time to make feel of what they were seeing, earlier than they were pushed forwards at blinding speed via their very own innate impulses, instantly for the lady clutching their brother and ally, instantly for the enemy with the vampire eyes. There has been no time to stop the collision. It befell too speedy. With the energy surging into her muscle groups like water falling through a floodgate, Bella directed a solid push to Jacob's chest, propelling him 6 feet into the air, out of harm's manner. After which the lioness took her area, exploding via the seams as she leapt for Leah and Paul. Piercing yelps and screams of terror ripped the air because the cat collided with the puppies. If it have been beating, my heart could have stopped dead in my chest when the two beasts closed their tooth around either shoulder of the white beauty. Her oral and mental cries of pain cut through me like a knife, as those substantial fangs sunk underneath the skin, tearing and ripping her flesh from both facets. All of a sudden, some connection linking my mind and frame all at once severed in two. I wasn't on top of things as I lunged from the porch with my dad and mom, brothers and sisters. I wasn't on top of things of my palms after I plunged my fists against the ribcage of the silver wolf, sending him crashing again against one of the cedars. I heard the wonderful crunching of his bones and the whooshing of air because it became pressured from his lungs, however even that did not have an effect on me. I used to be disconnected from the whole lot as I tossed wolf after wolf to one side in my desperation to have them far away from Bella, as were the alternative vampires. I am going to tear you in for this. Concept Rosalie as she and Alice smashed in opposition to Leah. The complete conflict lasted much less than 10 seconds. Earlier than the one's 10 seconds, but Bella were exceptional and wholesome, and now she became splayed out at the floor as limp as a rag doll. Skin as light as a sheet as her life force spilled out onto the grass, gushing from her left shoulder, where a large chunk of flesh and muscle have been removed, and from her jugular on the right facet of her neck, which had been ripped completely open. My Bella lay death on the ground, eyes wild and overflowing with fear, choking on her very own blood. Edward. Carlyle's frantic shouts unexpectedly penetrated my nightmare. Saint Mungo's. We've got we're given to get her there now. I'd by no means moved so speedy in all my life as I did when I swept her up in my arms right then. In our mad and desperate haste, we left the wolves at the back of without an explanation as to what that they had just witnessed. The closing element I noticed in my periphery earlier than I rocketed into the residence, had been Seth's large brown eyes, alarmed and frightened like a lost puppess. Esme flew ahead of me, and plunged her hand into the flow powder pouch so forcefully it changed into a surprise it failed to burst. She tossed the powder into the burning fire, and I released into the flickering emerald spires a sixth of a second later, not surely listening to the phrases I cried out afterwards. Fire blazed in my throat as we were pulled into the rainbow vortex, but I could slightly comprehend what it meant. The only thing I knew changed into that Bella became demise. Bella became dying. Death in my palms, nonetheless choking, her treasured, crimson blood leaking out into the magical network. I love you, she notion, earlier than losing aware. I screamed and shook her body as we flew, forbidding her to leave me. Help, I bellowed, in a voice more effective and dramatic than Pavarotti's as I burst into the crowded reception, in which dozens of witches and wizards, some impaired by means of serious disfigurements, have been seated. Help us. My dire plea right now earned me the attention of each person within the room, consisting of that of a portrait witch with silver ringlets. Their alert eyes zeroed in on the limp parent cradled in my fingers, whose blood turned into nevertheless spilling freely onto my garments and pores and skin. For one fraction of a second, they were all completely suspended via shock and horror, their hearts flying into overdrive as they inhaled a synchronous breath, and then, the healers in the lime green robes were charging far away from sufferers with trumpet ears, sufferers with upside-down nostril, and sufferers with arms on backwards, charging collectively, like a decided platoon of soldiers converging on a goal, straight for me and my hemorrhaging fiancé. What came about? Demanded a rosy-cheeked man with mousy hair and rounded spectacles. He and 3 others trailed their wands over Bella's perforated shoulder, at the same time as their colleagues noticed to her punctured neck, stopping the blood drift. It became an excellent task Carlyle chose that moment to appear, because I could not get the phrases out. I could not pressure my mind away from the ghost-white face of the lady I held. He pressured his manner through the assemblage of healers, driven by means of desperation and frenzied parental instinct. With the human limitations removed from his course, he won a clear view of Bella. Oh, God, her lips have been purple, her pores and skin turned into ghostly, and she had dark rings surrounding her eyes. Her heart, now tired after its futile battle, released one remaining vulnerable stutter, earlier than it gave up the combat and fell silent. Not anything may want to penetrate the horror that right away followed that terrible moment. It turned into best in a while, looking lower back in hindsight, that I should attach any significance or meaning to the unfathomable chaos that opened up around me. Carlyle shouted on the healers, telling them to magically restart Bella's coronary heart, as a young white-haired woman retaining a vial of purple potion broke through the ranks. Whilst she tipped the liquid into Bella's mouth, some other held a wand over the girl's larynx, chanting something in Latin, to make certain she did not choke. Her frame jolted violently in my fingers as someone else aimed a spell to her coronary heart, shocking it into its previous rhythm. The resuming beat added with it no alleviation, although that emotion changed into beyond me via that point. At the same time as the healers worked furiously, performing their ministrations, I stood immobile, completely oblivious to the dry whimpers and heavy respiratory of my mom and sisters. The ones, too, I most effective understood later. My brothers have been there too, consoling their other halves with steely embraces. The primary issue to penetrate my little bubble of melancholy have been Carlyle's thoughts as he referred to as my call. It is all right, Edward. She's stabilizing. We've given her a blood replenishing potion. I blinked in confusion. The healers had all taken a step lower back and have been now forming a tight semicircle. Others, meanwhile, were returning to the ready sufferers. All of a sudden, the bubble shattered absolutely, and everything came crashing down on me straight away. It became then that I realized a ragged cry became assaulting my ears, a strangled melody. How lengthy had I been dry sobbing? I searched Carlyle's face as he gave me a pat to the shoulder. "She's going to be all right," he said once more, protecting out his hands. "May I?" I shook my head resolutely. No, I wasn't going to permit her go. Carlyle exhaled a heavy sigh, however nodded in resignation. His young, immortal face could by no means screen fatigue, however it changed into there in his golden eyes. "Oh, Kay. However, those wounds need attention without delay. Come on." And with that, he led my circle of relatives and me through and far from the lobby. I vaguely registered the truth that Dilys Derwent, the portrait witch, had disappeared from her canvas. Had she long passed to relay the gossip to her medical institution pals? My fury flared on the mere idea. The others, meanwhile, fired query after query of their want for reassurance, stressful to recognize how the healers could proceed. With the quantity of blood she lost, Carlyle sighed, his eyes on Bella's neck. "It's going to take at the least 12 hours for the potion to deliver her return to complete fitness, so she's going to should spend the night time." "What approximately her injuries?" Rosalie demanded, wincing as she took in Bella's mangled shoulder. "God, I am hoping they could fix it." Of course that they had be capable of fix it, I wanted to shout at her at they all. If Madame Pomfrey could regrow Terry Boot's finger in the future, after it would been bitten off by using a red bloodin in herbology, there has been no way Bella could be leaving the clinic with a piece still missing from her anatomy. I'd threatened to eat every closing certainly one of them until she was again to me in the identical condition she'd been 5 minutes in the past. 5 minutes. Was that honestly all it had been? It felt greater, like a lifetime to me. We exited the stairwell onto the primary ground, which had been special for people suffering from creature-prompted injuries. Carlyle defined the technique for healing wounds like Bella's as he hurriedly led us to the dangerous Die Llewellyn ward, in which she could be staying. "Dittany will do maximum of the work. I will be able to give her every other potion to hurry up the cellular regrowth. However, apart from that, all she wishes now is a cleaning serum to save you contamination, and a piece of rest." He squeezed his distraught wife's hand then, in an effort to ease her pain. "The worst is over," Esme gasped. I knew the sound were observed by a surge of tears had she nevertheless been human. "She's going to be okay," she whispered disbelievingly. "But the blood, there was so much of it." "Sure, however, thanks to the potion the healers gave her within the lobby, she's already replenishing herself more than 100 instances the speed it might commonly take." Carlyle then went on to state that without magic, a human could need round months after a donation just to get their RBC level lower back to normal. Being professionals on blood-associated troubles, however, we have been all already privy to this. Still, we failed to interrupt our persuasive leader, due to the fact his anodyne phrases have been precisely what the own family had to pay attention, me particularly. Bella had magic on her side. She might be out of sanatorium that very same day. The ward became very dimly lit whilst we entered, the most effective slither of light coming from a cluster of sparkling crystal bubbles inside the middle of the ceiling. Contrary the door, there has been one small window. It was dark out of doors, which was handiest to be expected, because it turned into 2 inside the morning in England. I decreased Bella onto the loose mattress nearest the window. Her pores and skin turned into nonetheless as pale as a sheet, and her lips had only regained a tiny trace in their authentic pink, however the shadows round her eyes were fading. She looked greater human now at least. 2 healers came to help following our arrival. The oldest changed into called Hippocrates Smethwick, who turned into in price of the ward. The younger man, Augustus Pye, cautiously carried out the dittany to Bella's shoulder, whilst his superior eased any other potion into her mouth. The wound seemed weeks vintage by the time they finished, a layer of latest tissue already forming to update what were misplaced. "How lengthy will she be out?" Emmett asked worriedly, wearing a similar frown to that of the others. "Some hours," Hippocrates expected, "if the blood loss was as grave as you have advised me. When she does come around, however, she'll still be extremely worn out, so please allow her to rest." "Of course," Esme nodded, her arm secured tightly around Alice. My sister's eyes observed mine then, and they had been overflowing with fury and bloodlust. Is the treaty even nonetheless valid after this? And just like that, my fear melted into something 1,000 instances extra ferocious. I used to be completely ate up through a different thirst now, the one disturbing I returned to forks and obliterate those responsible for the almost fatality of the affection of my life. I might leave Seth out of it, he hadn't executed whatever incorrect I desired in charge to Jacob as much as I did Paul and Leah, but, in truth, the handiest issue he changed into aiming a few indignant phrases at my circle of relatives. That, of root, didn't forestall me from charging him while he wandered through the door. I caught one sorrow-crammed phrase before I lunged. Bella. I snarled louder, baring my teeth, like a wild animal. Esme and Carlyle had been brief to drag me off him. They wouldn't have got any assist from the others, even though, seeing that Jasper, Alice, Rosalie and Emmett have been all finding it tough to preserve their personal positions. Every of them have been itching to enroll in me. Thankfully, I nonetheless controlled to break Jacob's jaw before I was restricted, not that happy me. You silly, stinking, loathsome mutt. How I would love to kick you buuuuuuuutt. A flustered Hippocrates rushed forwards to intervene. Correct gracious. He gasped, before anger overrode his shock. Mr. Cullen, we treat the ill and injured here, no longer hospitalize the healthful. Sure, well, Rosalie seethed, pointing at Jacob, him and his moronic pals are the purpose Bella is in right here inside the first vicinity. If whatever, he deserves to be hospitalized. SSSH, the wizard ordered, now crimson in the face. His situation for his patients, all of whom had been awoken by means of the scuffle, and were now staring on at the scene with mild interest, removed any he had for his very own exact health. Rosalie stared at the person in shock. No human had ever shushed her earlier than. The wizard then turned to Jacob. Is that authentic? Jacob nodded, clutching his swelling jaw with each arms. The person sniffed, and pointed his wand on the mud's face. Every other loud crack sounded as his bones realigned. Jacob yelped in ache, but then his cries cut off and his expression grew to become wondrous. Not possible, he concept, lightly rubbing his jaw. Impossible. This isn't always happening. It can be. First, Bella becomes a cat. Okay, so, all matters considered, it is no longer that tough to trust, though incredibly fantastic. A paranormal teleporting fire although. A man who can mend damaged bones with a stick. And speak me humans shifting in and out of paintings. I have long gone bananas. It really is it. I have lost my marbles. Or perhaps that is all a dream. A dream. This changed into his concept of a dream was it. I thrashed in opposition to my dad and mom keep, infuriated by using the canine's stupidity. I will gladly give you one extra mincing. In case you think you need convincing. Jacob's eye flashed huge for a 2D. He shook his head in an attempt to clean it, earlier than dumbly asking, why are you singing? Leaning as a long way forwards as my parents' marble fingers might allow, I spat, because, you silly boy. My Bella should have died. And now the notion of killing you makes me feel all warm internal. Rosalie laughed darkly, even as Carlyle rolled his eyes. Edward is under a spell, he defined. It have to put on off quickly. A spell, yes. My father, commonly so polite, couldn't forestall the curtness from seeping into his tone. He didn't blame the mutt for this, however he couldn't forget about the reality that Bella's current circumstance changed into the fault of the wolves. I am sure you, of absolutely everyone, will accept as true with me once I let you know there is greater to the arena than science. Magic is actual. Jacob gulped. Coward. And Bella, a witch. Silence swept the room as we waited for Jacob to absorb our revelation. He regarded Carlyle at the beginning with suspicion and doubt, the belief seeming too ridiculous to be believable. His skepticism, but, soon gave way to recognition. How may want to it now not whilst he simply surfed the community. He need to have seen one of the others enter the fireplace, and had worked up the courage to comply with them via. I wondered in brief whether or not we must be expecting the appearance of more page C individuals. That became soon replied when I caught the thoughts of Seth down in the reception region. He iced up at the sight of the people seated there, and gawked overtly at a round-bellied guy with actual cauliflower ears. The man looked up from a borrowed hospital mag. His cheeks flamed when he realized he become being watched. Had a row with the spouse, he said sheepishly, in a thick Liverpudlian accent, as though that become clarification enough. Seth nodded, pretending he understood, earlier than edging away. He accompanied our fragrance up the stairs, permitting himself one closing look returned over his shoulder on the crowded reception. That is just this is super. Wicked freaky, positive, however great. I cannot agree with Bella and the Cullens have been retaining out on me. I am absolutely gonna key. The reminiscence of Bella's harm interrupted Seth's mind, turning his mood darker and extra fearful. The ultimate factor he idea before he thrust himself up the stairs at complete pelt turned into I am going to murder Leah for this. No longer if I beat you to it. While the younger Quileute burst into the ward much less than a minute later, Jacob was nonetheless processing the statistics we would currently shared with him. He hadn't moved a muscle, and changed into persevering with to gaze on at the recovering girl in the mattress by means of the window, his eyes brimming with ache. Seth barreled beyond him, and headed directly over to her side. His pal likely could finish the identical, if he thought he'd be capable of get away with it without dropping a limb. Bella's eyes were moving slowly behind her eyelids. Truly a good signal. No longer being able to hear her thoughts every day was irritating, but now I felt as though I was going out of my thoughts. The one's little movements of REM supplied the most effective proof of mind interest. Is she going to be good enough? Seth demanded frantically, analyzing Bella's wounds. He blinked in surprise upon realizing that the destroyed flesh changed into already starting to be replaced via new tissue. However, Paul and Leah they almost. I tousled at the memory. Carlisle and Esme launched me soon after to allow me to go and stand by Bella's bedside. Seth shook his head. He must have torn a pound of flesh away at the least. This time I hissed. Now not assisting. Seth, Alice uttered underneath her breath. He appeared first at my sister, after which at me, his expression apologetic. Sorry, I nodded. After some greater moments of awkward silence, the innocent wolf asked an evidence. Carlisle then proceeded to usher the 2% members outdoor into the corridor. I stayed with Bella, due to the fact I thought it'd be more secure. Rosalie, but, wasn't overly worried with the idea that she may accidentally damage Jacob, and marched out of doors after the three, where she stood beside Carlisle, hanging an angry pose along with her hands folded over chest. Emmett sighed and went to sign up for her. Carlisle gave Seth and Jacob a brief précis of Bella's records, revealing how she had been born one of a kind, and had hence been inducted into a mystery global simply earlier than she grew to become 11. He advised them of the wizarding community, which include the faculty wherein human beings with magical expertise have been taught. Like folks who was animals you suggest? Jacob presented. Rosalie scowled. I may not be a thoughts reader, Scooby, but I understand what you are thinking. Piece of recommendation. Put it out of your head. Bella is nothing such as you. Jacob's nostrils flared. In reality, he said, his voice loaded with sarcasm, because I am pretty sure I noticed her morph right into a large furry cat, or have been you no longer there. Let me ask you something, mongrel, my sister growled, taking a step forward. Can you teleport yourself from one kingdom to another within the blink of an eye fixed? No. Can you turn a dog into a footstool? No. Jacob responded flatly. Are you able to kill a dwelling creature with a single incantation? Seth's expression mirrored Jacob's at that remaining question. They each stared at Rosalie with seams of outright horror, neither capable of shape a response. Properly Bella can. Rosalie, Carlisle warned cautiously, inflicting Emmett's eyes to roll. Yeah, purpose it is gonna forestall her. Sure sufficient. She omitted him absolutely, refusing to be deterred from making her point. As the end result, I revel in a massive swell of love for the blonde vampire. Never earlier than had I preferred her tenacity so extraordinarily. On top of that, form shifting turned into a skill she needed to analyze. It did not just come to her. And simply in case you need reminding, cats and puppies do not mix. That's the closing thing I am considering proper now, Jacob murmured softly, consider me. In equity to him, he changed into more involved with Bella's health at gift than arguing his case as a better and more suitable suitor. I wish Blondie might just wander away. I do not need to try this now. In truth, I don't want to try this ever. What's the point? All it does is hurt Bella, and I have visible that manifest too many times already. If she whilst she receives higher, I'll by no means question her decision once more. And if Edward does not re-sever Paul's spine after it's mended itself, I'll gladly do it myself. Rosalie sneered at Jacob and shook her head. I will wager, if you suppose. Rose, I said lowly, cutting her off, relieved when the phrase did not pop out in track, go away it. He is telling the truth. I heard her teeth clamp together and grind in infection. Even though she failed to dispute my education, she became determined to bring her dislike for Jacob earlier than leaving, and summoned the dirtiest expression she may want to her adorable face. If he attempts something, I'll rip his legs off. All 4 of them. Bella is ours. She's the only threat I have got left. As usually, Rosalie becomes stimulated via her own selfishness. For the previous few months, however, that aspect of her character have been running in my favor. Deep down, I think she knew there has been not anything that could help her situation, but even that one tiny desire, that minuscule particle of possibility, turned into more than she'd ever had, for the reason that becoming a vampire. She'd do the entirety in her energy now to preserve Bella inside the circle of relatives. My sister, ushered away through her husband, reluctantly left Carlisle to complete summarizing Bella's magical history. Her bitter expression softened as she reached the bedside, and notwithstanding the nature of her incentives, it was obvious she had advanced a much extra worrying mindset with regard to Bella, who she now, unequivocally, taken into consideration a sister. A crease regarded within the space among her eyes. She nevertheless would not appearance desirable too light. Indeed, Bella nevertheless hadn't recovered enough blood to restore the blush to her cheeks. Her skin became sallow and waxy. It became clean, as usually, however it still had a totally dangerous look about it. The lower 1/2 of her lengthy mahogany hair turned into tinted crimson with blood, disheveled and stringy, unlike the smooth vivid strands in the direction of her scalp. She will be okay. Jasper confident us, tasting the room's anxieties. A sturdy wave of calm fell over us then, and all of us nodded. Alice tried to look beforehand for us, but once again, her vision was blocked through the Quileutes. This did not anything for her mood, turning it even greater frosty. Eventually, Seth and Carlisle re-entered the room. Jacob, then again, went to fetch Charlie. In the course of his absence, the relaxation folks discussed how we might proceed with the wolves. The fray had left numerous contributors of the percent injured. I had broken Paul's spine. Rosalie and Alice collectively had shattered Leah's shoulder blades after thrusting her again in opposition to some other cedar. Sam had sustained 3 damaged ribs, and Jared had suffered a broken jaw. In the end, Carlisle concluded to ship a healer return to Forks with Jacob. I would not have begrudged remedy for Jared and Sam, in view that their handiest crimes had been to try to defend their buddies. All through the visit, but the healer could no question fix Leah and Paul, when I might quicker had them go through. As matters have been, it became in no manner feasible to transfer them to St. Mungo's. Their proximity might been too much of a temptation, and that I certainly wouldn't had been capable of resist maiming them past restore. The younger wolf had only been long gone 10 minutes whilst we acquired any other visitor. Bella, Bella Swan, a familiar voice cried from down the hallway. Wherein is she? Now not some other one. My forehead furrowed because the faces of Harry and Ron flashed through Professor McGonagall's thoughts. What did that imply? I endured to pay attention cautiously, while Esme walked in a timely fashion from the room to fulfill the panicked witch. Minerva. Oh, Esme, the aged witch stated, her face troubled with grief. Her hands located the ivory sleeve of my mom's crocheted blouse. Is she very well? She misplaced a number of. Esme lightly waved a hand to silence the headmistress. Bella's all right, Minerva. Edward were given her here just in time. She's in the Di Llewellyn ward, getting better. How did you discover, even though? Dilys Derwent informed me. At that, my siblings threw me burdened and expectant glances, as though I the family understand it all have to have realized the identification of this thriller person. I did, however, understand the call. It wriggled to the vanguard of my thoughts as I searched my reminiscence. There is a portrait of a woman named Dilys Derwent inside the health center lobby, I informed them. Yes, said Carlisle, scribbling notes onto a clipboard. He was recording the info of Bella's vitals, and deciding from that the extra potions she'd need to eat. Dilys Derwent turned into a former healer inside the 18th century, and then she turned into granted the placement of headmistress at Hogwarts. She occupies photographs each right here and at the school, and can flow among either one. The professor burst through the doors and into the wooden-paneled room. Her darkish inexperienced, ground duration dress billowed out behind her as she ran closer to Bella and my own family. Her hair became unpinned, and fell to her waist. She must had been asleep whilst Dilys arrived in her workplace, and hadn't he afflicted to pin it into its traditional fashion in her rush to get to the hospital. Her face conveyed her alarm as she registered Bella's sickly look, and she or he changed into quickly hurling questions left, right, and center, worrying to know what had took place. Why is it that it's continually mine constantly Gryffindors? First Harry and Ronald, and now Bella. I inhaled sharply as a series of photos darted through the female's thoughts. Harry and Ron in clinic beds, every inch of their pores and skin blanketed with bruises and dried blood, their skulls partly misshapen. The witch flinched as I streaked from one facet of the mattress to the alternative and gently shook her shoulders. Edward, what are you? What changed into that, Professor? I demanded gently, reducing off a involved Esme. Harry and Ron, what as came about to them? At the beginning, McGonagall simply blinked in shock, so crushed through emotion that she briefly forgot my potential. There has been an twist of fate. What, when? Yesterday afternoon, she sighed. They have been out strolling with Leave-Out Granger, Leave-Out Weasley, and Arthur Weasley. Arthur wanted Harry's help with a mobility cell phone, a mobile telephone, something it's far you call the one's blasted contraptions. What happened? Esme probed. They had been far from the house, because magic changed into interfering with the reception. I supplied. McGonagall nodded in exasperation. If the circumstances hadn't been so black, I'd laughed at how hopeless maximum witches and wizards appeared to be with generation. Yes, the professor said, the reception. Anyway, Arthur wanted to reach high ground, because he'd read that was good for phones, and so he directed the group towards the highest point in the area. The quickest route took them through a narrow gorge, only it wasn't safe there, and in her head, I saw her imagination construct the horrific scene. Rays of golden sunshine spilled down onto the group as they navigated their way through the slim alley, which was formed by two opposing walls of moss-covered granite, as well as an intersecting stream, separating one half from the other. Hermione and Ginny were walking at the head, edging their way along the stream, being careful as to not lose their footing, whilst Ron, Harry, and Mr. Weasley followed at the back. When they reached an ancient natural archway, one formed by thousands of years of weathering and erosion, Ron and Harry paused beneath it, staring up in appreciation. All of a sudden, there was a terrible crack, and the rock above them fractured at its left haunch, the one directly overhead. In the blink of an eye, the entire structure crumbled, and was sent crashing down onto the two unprepared boys. The professor shook her head, and squeezed her eyes shut in an attempt to cut off the images hiding behind them. Professor McGonagall, I urged, lightly grabbing the woman's shoulders again, are they here in the hospital? The witch nodded, and whispered. Miss Granger and Miss Weasley were very quick. They had the debris cleared in a matter of seconds, and then they apparated the boys here. If they'd been here a minute later, Mr. Potter and Mr. Weasley would be dead now. I don't understand, Esme panicked. What happened to them? Rock collapse, I answered quickly, before returning my concentration to the witch. They not though, are they? They not dead. Will the healers be able to fix them? McGonagall pulled herself together with a sharp inhalation. She looked physically and emotionally exhausted, but put on a brave face regardless, determined, as always, to exude that very strength and courage fundamental to Gryffindor. The boys will recover, certainly, but I am afraid their stay here will be far longer than Miss Swan's. I've been told that they'll need a lot of work before they can be discharged. What kind of work? Asked Carlyle. I only know the basics, but both their skeletal structures and internal organs were critically damaged. They being fed one potion every hour just to keep them alive, and 2 additional potions to repair the bones and tissue. It'll be 3 weeks until they fully recovered. We all fell into silence then, each individual tangled up in their own thoughts. Emmett, though bordering on infuriating, simultaneously had a medicinal effect. Despite his concern for Harry and Ron, he had seen too much magic in the recent months, and had subsequently developed so much faith in it that his thoughts quickly began wandering to how this turn of events would affect Gryffindor's upcoming match against Hufflepuff. I wonder if McGonagall will let us postpone it, or maybe switch it with no. I doubt she will, since Malfoy's absence already screwed up the schedule. Damn it, do we even have a reserve seeker? I know we could always pull in Brian O'Neilly, that kid who did well in the keeper tryouts, but a seeker. Although I wanted to deck my brother, at the same time, his confidence was precisely what I needed. I was a natural worrier, whereas Emmett had always been the total opposite. He was convinced that all three would make a full recovery, and, therefore, found it difficult to hold on to his anxieties. They slipped away from him like soap. Esme's fears, on the other hand, were more like lead, and would continue to weigh her down until each Gryffindor was completely healed. Poor Mrs. Weasley, she thought. And Mr. Weasley, too. I'll bet they re-mad with worry, especially after losing Fred. I should pay them a visit. At the mention of their names, my mind automatically searched for their unique voices. I found Molly Weasley's almost immediately, for it was saturated with that same maternal sadness that had occupied her mind since the death of her son. She was located on the ground floor, seated between the beds of Ron and Harry, both of whom looked far worse in reality than in McGonagall's memory. Mr. Weasley, however, was nowhere in hearing distance. Perhaps he was conveying the news to other family members. In his place, Kingsley Shacklebolt was present, though I suppose that wasn't all that surprising. The British magical community had adopted Harry Potter as a symbol of hope and heroism. His untimely death, therefore, would devastate the entire nation. The minister, as a result, would do everything in his power to ensure the boy received the best medical attention. Accompanying him was Brone, the sandy-haired man who had displayed so much contempt for my family and I at the Halloween masquerade. Alpheus Truman, the careless and absent-minded Auror, was there too, propped up against the wall, his eyes glazed over as usual. I turned to Esme and Carlisle. Watch over Bella for me. There's something I have to do. They didn't question my motives, because they knew whatever was bothering me would have to be important if it would drag me away from Bella at a time like this. Before I left, I placed a kiss on her forehead, inhaling her freesia scent. I'll be here when you wake up, Bella, I promised her. Her eyes began moving more rapidly behind her eyelids. Good, I love you. Had I not been a Legilimens, as Bella liked to call me, I never could have brought myself to leave, but since my ability would grant me a view provided that I remained in range, I summoned the necessary strength. I rushed back down the stairwell and onto the ground floor, turning left at the welcome desk into a wide, brightly lit passage, at the end of which stood Hermione and Ginny. The two girls were huddled closely together, conversing in rushed whispers. Their eyes were red and puffy, a result of exhaustion combined with too much crying. Men and women in lime green robes passed by them as they went about their duties. The healers, all of whom were used to encounters with distraught relatives, partners, and friends of injured patients, sent looks of sympathy in the direction of the girls. Other than that, however, they gave them as much space as possible. Hey, I said solemnly. Hermione and Ginny started at my unexpected approach, but their initial shock soon melted into relief, and they ran at me together, a second later. I opened my arms for them, and buried my face against Hermione's shoulder. I felt little drops of moisture form against my skin as my shirt absorbed their tears. Providing comfort came more easily than I would have expected. It felt natural. Perhaps that was because I could hear their minds, and knew that neither were driven by lechery, as other females might have been, even in a situation as grave as this. Hermione and Ginny loved their men. They had no romantic interest in anyone other than the two unconscious boys in the next room. On top of that, I felt a strange camaraderie forming between us, an effect of having to suffer such similar torments. Oh, Edward, Hermione sobbed. I know, I murmured. After a few moments, the two girls took a step back. Ginny, who was doing a better job of holding herself together, wound her arms around her friend's waist, convinced that Hermione needed the support. It might take a few weeks, but Harry and Ron will get through this. It probably would have turned out differently if it hadn't been for you two. Hermione sniffed and nodded. What are you doing here anyway? She asked. I sighed. The last thing I wanted to do was to intensify the witch's grief and fears, but I couldn't lie to them. I hastily recounted the events which had almost resulted in Bella's death. Hermione's and Ginny's thoughts mirrored the outward horror displayed on their faces as they absorbed the story. "Is she going to be all right?" Ginny questioned, unable to wrap her lips around the words. I nodded. "She'll be fully recovered by noon. My family is with her in the Die Llewellyn ward. McGonagall too. That's how I found out about Harry and Ron. The professor informed us of the accident." The girls' expressions darkened in an instant. I discerned the distinct snap of Ginny's teeth as they clamped together, and heard Hermione suck in a sharp breath. Beneath the surface, both were seething. "It wasn't an accident, Edward." My eyes flashed to Hermione. What do you mean?" She shook her head, eyes hard. "I might not have seen it happen, but I know a spell when I hear it, and I am telling you now, something hit that arch." There was a sound like an explosion, and then it collapsed. "Someone must have followed us." "It wouldn't have been difficult," Ginny agreed with a growl, "and we all know how much the Death Eaters want Harry dead." I saw my face crease with concern in her mind. "You sure about this?" "Absolutely. Think about, what are the chances that an arch that old one that stood for hundreds of years would collapse randomly without disturbance, right when Harry Potter happened to be standing beneath it?" I considered that for about a second, before I accepted that the girls were right. It was too much of a coincidence. At the same time, however, it seemed just as dangerous to completely rule out the possibility that this was all down to simple bad luck. The problem was that, after his triumph over Voldemort, everyone seemed to be taking Harry's mortality for granted, harboring ideas of power and invincibility. I didn't believe Hermione and Ginny to be that foolish, though. I trusted their judgment, especially when it came to magic. If they said they recognized the signs of it, then I wouldn't contradict them. "All right, I believe you," I said, "and, I promise, after this is over, we're going to figure it out." Before I left them, I gave Hermione's shoulder a gentle squeeze of encouragement and reassurance. "Thanks," Ginny thought to me. I sent her a nod and a small smile in response, after which, I pushed open the doors to the Ezra Turville ward, and marched unashamedly inside. I had 3 whole seconds to take in my surroundings, before my arrival inspired the inevitable verbal onslaught. The room possessed a similar design to that of the Die Llewellyn ward. It had oak paneling, and the same glowing crystals embedded in the ceiling, though these weren't concentrated in one particular area, and, instead, were scattered in a star-like pattern. Only 4 of 8 beds were filled. A curtain surrounded one, blocking my view of the patient, who, by the sound of his slow, deep breathing, was asleep. In the next cot, however, there lied a man with horrible disfigurements. His skin was hairless and waxy, and looked as if it had melted, for it sagged around his eyes like candle wax, whilst the bottom half of his nose had been completely removed. According to the clipboard attached to the bed's foot frame, he'd been experimenting with dangerous magical substances when his cauldron had exploded. "Bloodsucker!" Brone exclaimed in outrage. Beside him, Kingsley smiled with relief, the frown vanishing from his face. "I prefer Edward, actually," I retorted. Honestly, I could understand the Irish wizard's contempt for my kind, and in his shoes, I would have felt exactly the same, but, right now, I wasn't in the mood for his abusive attitude. I should have known you'd be here when I felt that niggle. "Been spying, have we?" Ignoring his question, I marched past him and approached Mrs. Weasley, who was sat in a brown leather armchair by Ron, her face pressed into his bedsheets. There was no way I ever could have ignored this woman, not when I could hear every note of her despair from Bella's ward. She wanted her son to have a long, happy life, just as mine had. How could I not console her? "Not another one. I can lose another one. You one T. They both going to get better." The witch gave no response. I gently laid a hand on her shoulder. "Where's your husband, Mrs. Weasley?" "I don't know, but he couldn't face this place. He looked half mad when he came to tell me. He blames himself for what happened. For not being able to prevent it. He kept saying it was his fault over and over." Mrs. Weasley whimpered loudly into the cotton fabric. The sound was a catalyst for Brone's rage. "Look what you've done now, you filth!" he shouted. "Brone," warned the minister. His friend continued, undeterred. "That's all your kind does, isn't it? Spread misery." I let my hand fall away from Mrs. Weasley's shoulder. It would have been a mistake to keep it there when so much anger was bubbling to life inside me. You make me sick. You and every evil, vile, repulsee. Shut you, I bellowed, whirling on the man. Mrs. Weasley and the minister flinched. Brown, meanwhile, was so startled by my sudden outburst that he stumbled backwards and collided with a dazed and unsuspecting Alpheus. Brown grunted with the impact, and in a tangle of limbs that sent the pair crashing to the floor, the two ended up sprawled across wooden panels, one beside the other, gazing wide-eyed up at the crystal-encrusted ceiling. Confusion was the predominant emotion written across Alpheus' face. His forehead creased in his efforts to work out how he ended up flat on his back, and his addled mind immediately earned my scrutiny. How did I end up down here? He wondered, blinking up at Kingsley's hand as he offered it down to the oar. Alpheus took it, and allowed himself to be pulled to his feet. Once he was upright, he curiously looked about the room, as if seeing it for the first time, before his eyes landed back on the minister. Afterwards, he ran a hand through his auburn hair, before stretching his arms above his head. Think I am going to go home and get some rest, he yawned. His voice was deep and gruff, not at all what I would have expected for someone who constantly had his head in the clouds. Kingsley sighed, seeming resigned. All right, see you tomorrow, Al. Alpheus nodded, before turning to Mrs. Weasley. He waved cheerfully, and flashed her a grin incongruous with the gloomy atmosphere. Night, Molly. The witch was unsure of how to respond. On the one hand, she didn't want to seem impolite, but she also didn't appreciate the Auror's unceremonious and insensitive blindness. Night, Alpheus. I watched with Kingsley, Brown, and Mrs. Weasley as the peculiar man lazily trudged away from us. I'd expected him to exit out into the corridor, but he veered off to the left at the last minute, instead climbing into one of the ward's unoccupied beds. These sheets smell really nice, he decided, sniffing the white fabric as he reclined against the mattress. I don't remember washing 'em. 5 seconds later, Alpheus' soft snore filled our baffled silence. I stared at him for a moment longer, and pondered over his strange behavior. The first time I had encountered Alpheus Truman had been at the masquerade, and back then, he had been employing occlumency against me as competently as Bella. Now, however, his mind was open and unshielded. I couldn't help but wonder why anyone would abandon an ability that offered them so much protection. It could be him, I murmured, turning to Kingsley. The imperious wizard. Something's not right with him. That much is obvious. Mrs. Weasley nodded in agreement. Kingsley, on the other hand, sighed and shook his head, whilst Brown sneered condescendingly, like an arrogant school teacher enjoying the superiority granted by his job. Do you think we idiots, bloodsucker? Only a fool would overlook Alpheus' recent conduct, especially after he accidentally put Douglas Twiddle in the hospital. Why do you think Kingsley hasn't elected a head or yet? He's not there simply because of his expertise. He's there because it's the best way to monitor Alpheus. Then again, he added, you probably didn't have time to figure that out, did you? Not when you're a selfish, narcissistic vampire too busy satisfying your own. Brown, Kingsley barked, losing his patience, shut the hell up, would you? Brown glared mutinously at his friend, angered by the rebuke. In the end, however, he submissively relented, and marched over to a free armchair, grumbling under his breath as he slumped down against the leather. Sorry about him, Kingsley thought apologetically. I gave him a sad smile to let him know I understood. Alpheus, I probed, not imperious. You'll have noticed, I am sure, that he frequently accompanies me when my work takes me away from the ministry. Yes, occasionally, Brown will keep an eye on him when I can We're taking all sorts of measures, watching the flow network to see who goes to and from his house, intercepting any owls he sends. And what? Kingsley exhaled heavily, and ran a hand over his shiny bald head. And nothing. As far as we can tell, he's not the informant. He hasn't passed any information on to our enemies whatsoever. I frowned at that, allowing my sight to drift back to the slumbering Auror. Already, he had begun to drool into his pillow, deep in sleep. When I peeked into his mind, I saw that his dreams were filled with bizarre creatures: giraffes with elephant trunks, eels with chicken heads, and puppies with armadillo bodies. I am telling you now, I murmured, turning my head back to Kingsley. There is something wrong with that man. I'll admit when I first read the article in the Prophet on how you'd be running the Auror office, I was sure that Alpheus was innocent. He was in a Cullens, and his scent didn't match that of the man who attacked Bella on Halloween. Still, even if that is the case, which it probably is, his mind is still. I paused to consider everything I'd glimpsed in the last 5 minutes: a distorted perception of time, a reduced awareness of environment, an inability to focus, and memory impairment. I sighed. It's as if he's suffering from delirium, always in an acute and constant state of confusion. Confusion, Kingsley nodded. A fitting description. Think he's been confounded? Brone questioned from his chair. All traces of his fury now vanished, replaced instead with concern for his friend. Kingsley shrugged. It's possible. Either way, I said seriously, right now, he's the only lead we have. We need to find out whether or not he saw part of this. And how do you suppose we do that? Brone inquired brusquely. How about a stakeout? Kingsley and Brone exchanged quick glances. A stakeout, the minister thought. It might work. Brone, it seemed, didn't share his comrade's enthusiasm. You're kidding, right? He said doubtfully. That's your brilliant input, a stakeout. No, Kingsley interrupted excitedly. I think it's a good idea. It certainly couldn't hurt. Point taken. But who exactly are you going to nominate for this? Surely not the Bloods. You, Edward, Kingsley interrupted sternly, is the perfect candidate for this, what with his strong senses and the fact that he doesn't require sleep. That is if you want the task. He looked at me hopefully, smiling when I nodded. I do. Brone bolted up from his chair, now red in the face. Oh, come on, Kingsley. You can seriously be considering giving this to a vampire? To guard our friend. I don't believe this. You should be entrusting me with this, not him. Your prejudices are not my prejudices, Brone. Edward would do well with this better than any witch or wizard. My eye. The minister sighed in exasperation. All right, then, if you're so worried for Alpheus' safety, why don't you go with him? 2 heads are better than 1. Whilst I had no problem with the idea of working alongside the Irish Auror, Brone looked as if he was about to murder his friend for even suggesting such a thing. He shook his head defiantly, his nostrils flaring in anger as he stamped his foot. Never. I'll never work with him, he whispered. Not even when doing so could help advance the case and potentially save lives. I countered. The glare of the vampire hater intensified, his eyes brimming with frosty hostility. In the end, of course, there was no way for him to refuse, since my question had put him in a very awkward position. What was more important, staying as far away from me as possible, or bringing the Death Eaters to justice? Brone knew the answer, which was probably why he looked as if he wanted to kill me twice as much now. The black pressure lifted abruptly as we materialized beneath the shelter of a giant willow. We were standing in a vast meadow, which I estimated roughly to be about 9 acres. It was bordered on one side by steep rock exposures, and on the, by a line of trees, forming the edge of a forest, which curved in towards the upraised earth, thereby enclosing the area. The cliff face had dozens of little doors and windows built into it. The first wizard to have lived in Renesmee had been a serious and dedicated herbologist. He had wished to preserve the area's flora, and had therefore hollowed out a section of the sandstone cliff, making his home in the earth. Others had copied the idea until, finally, the cliff was fully occupied. Except for these strange dwellings, though, there was nothing else there in Renesmee, aside from the giant willow and lily pond just off the meadow's center. Brone grunted and jumped away from me. A vein over his temple had begun to bulge when he realized he'd have to transport me by side-along apparition. I'd tried not to roll my eyes at that point, and had reminded myself of the reason why he was so opposed to my kind. Which one is his? I asked, eyeing the many doors. 5th one in, he answered, pointing to a door on the left half of the curving cliff. I nodded, and settled down into the grass. My knees had barely touched the earth when I was shooting back to my feet. The motion sent the wizard's heart into a flurry. Someone's here, I hissed, my gaze locking on an empty space 50 meters away. What? Who? SSH. Though there was nothing visible, I discerned a very human heartbeat. On top of that, I could hear a mind. Someone was hiding within a magically shielded space, scanning the surrounding area for my accomplice and I. I know I heard something. Someone apparated just a second ago. Where are they? The voice was familiar. I'd heard it before. Whoever this person was, he was young, around Bella's age. Wait here, I said lowly, and stay under the willow. He won't see you that way. Who won't? Brone demanded in a whisper. Who's out there? I can be certain, but I think I trailed off and darted soundlessly through the dark a lightning-quick predator, unseen to my invisible prey as I blended with the night. Creeping around to the opposite side, I stepped through the shield, and was immediately presented with a dark brown wizard tent. The spy stood with his back to me, still gazing out at the willow tree, but I would have recognized that wiry hair and arrogant posture anywhere, even though I'd only had the displeasure of seeing it for one evening. Well. The wizard yelped at my unexpected arrival, and whirled on the spot, snatching up his wand. Cormac McLagan, what brings you here? His blinked in shock. Cullen, you remember me? I am touched. He grunted and rolled his eyes. What the hell are you doing here? I asked you first. Cormac's lips pursed in concentration. Hogwarts, Hoggywarty Hogwarts, teach us something please. Whether we be old and bald, or young with scabby knees. Like last time, he was trying to block me out. Well, that was all very well, but two could play at that game, and anyone who thought to test their patience against a vampire was nothing short of a fool. I marched past the boy and stepped over the magical border, waving my hands to call Brone. He joined me immediately, too curious to hesitate. McLagan, right, he said in surprise. Aren't you Tiberius Ogden's nephew? Yes, my uncle is an elder of the Wizengamot, Cormac answered pompously. What are you doing out here? The young wizard remained tight-lipped, folding his arms over his chest whilst he continued to concentrate on the school song. I was relieved to have taken him by surprise. If he'd been expecting us, he might have chosen a vulgar rhyme instead, like he did during our first meeting. Brone's eyes landed on me when he received no response, his gaze questioning. I ignored him for the time being, locking my attention on the man before me. For over 5 minutes, I engaged Cormac in a battle of stares. Despite the winter frost, beads of perspiration formed on his forehead as he concentrated on keeping me out. Eventually, however, the pressure became too much for him, and he slipped. I snorted loudly as his thoughts sounded in my head. What? Asked Brone, clearly irritated after the lengthy silence. I grinned. Cormac's been spying on Alpheus for over a month now. He thinks he's the Imperious Wizard, so he's been spending every night out here in the cold in an attempt to gather evidence. He thinks it will improve his chances of a promotion. That must be why he was sneaking around at the masquerade tired of his desk job. Personally, I didn't think there was anything wrong with his occupation. It involved decent, honest work. Cormac didn't share my opinion, though. He was unsatisfied with his position, making it all the more easy to rile him. Despite his continued hostility towards me, Brone couldn't help but crack a grin. Nice, he chuckled, but you needn't have bothered, kid. Alpheus isn't cursed. Cormac's smug expression was becoming increasingly enraged with each passing second. No, he growled, marching up to Brone until their chests were practically touching. Then why are you here? Fancied a midnight frolic in the meadow, did we? He tuned his face on me then, and looked me up and down with a leer. I don't think Swan will be too impressed, do you? Leave her out of this. Now, the Auror interceded, evidently enjoying my irritation. Let us all play nice, shall we? McLagan, in answer to your query, Cullen is the last person I would like to lie down and frolic with, and we are here because, whilst we don't think Alpheus Truman is imperious, we believe he may be confounded. Cormac's face initially registered his surprise, but his expression turned doubtful in the ensuing seconds, whilst his hooded eyes filled with distrust. Confounded? What would be the point of that? No idea, I said, marching around to the front of the tent, where I'd have an unobstructed view of the cliffs, but I intend to find out. Brone conjured an armchair and a blanket for himself beside me. Cormac, meanwhile, shouted his protests, demanding that we leave immediately, which, of course, we refused to do. This is my spot, you can just commandeer it. Sure we can, Brone disagreed. Now, either you sit down and shut up, or I body bind you until the morning. Your choice. Though he grumbled, McLaggen gave in, and sank down in an armchair next to Brone. We sat in silence for another 15 minutes, awaiting the arrival of Alpheus himself. Kingsley was due to help the man back to his house, but he sent us ahead to make sure we found a decent spying place first. At 3:30 in the morning, Greenwich Mean Time, the minister popped into the meadow supporting his tired friend. He led Alpheus to the 5th house in the cliff, and opened the door for him. I watched through his mind as he lit the lamps in the rocky hallway, and ushered the Auror up an enclosed narrow staircase, which had been roughly carved into the cliff's sandstone. Alpheus' bedroom was of a modest size, and possessed one small window. Despite that, it was a very nice space, with the wardrobes and cupboards built into the stone walls, a crimson rug stretching across the floor, and an oak-framed 4-poster. Best light the lamps in here too, the minister thought, after helping his friend onto the bed. Otherwise he might walk into a wall or something. Before he left, Kingsley ensured that every room in the house was well lit. Luckily, fossil fuels weren't essential in the wizarding world. Their carbon footprint was virtually non-existent. All right, Edward, Kingsley thought as he exited the cliff house. It's all yours. And, with that, he disapparated. Alpheus' home was the only one with light spilling out from it. The others were all bathed in shadow, their inhabitants sleeping peacefully within the cliff. I could hear their slow breathing, and a few deep snores. Altogether, I distinguished 27 inhabitants in the 12 separate dwellings. How is it down there? Cormac sniggered, interrupting my train of thought. I smirked in response. I am a vampire. I could be dangling by my toes and I'd still be comfier than you were in that armchair. How's the frost? The wizard's eyes narrowed. That's right. Us human don't like the cold. Does Swan's teeth chatter when you hold her? Allow me to reiterate, I growled. I am a vampire. Watch yourself. McLaggen gulped, his bravery waning. Brone's eyes, meanwhile, filled with hate and snapped to mine. I was instantly sorry for my tactlessness. If I'd been a human who had had his wife murdered by the undead, the last thing I would want to hear would be a threat from the very creature I considered my enemy. What I don't understand, he admitted, his tone deadly, is why any human would be stupid enough to get into bed with someone who wanted to kill them. Bella is far from stupid. She could have fooled me. I flashed to my feet in a heartbeat, invading the Auror's space as I towered over him. Let's get this straight, Brone, I hissed. I won't begrudge you your hatred, considering what you lost, as long as it's aimed at me. But insult my fiancé one more time, and Cormac will be apparating you back to the hospital. Am I clear? The Auror sneered, but turned his head from mine. Cormac's heart was flying into overdrive beneath all that bravado. He was just as frightened by my kind as most humans would be. He wrapped his blanket more tightly around himself, tucking his knees into his chest to retain warmth. I would have suggested a thermal spell, but I was hoping he'd just go inside instead. He managed to stay awake for an extra hour, but his eyelids finally began to droop, and he sunk into sleep. Brone magically transferred him into the tent, because it was either that or cast a silencing charm to dull the snoring. I used the quiet to focus my thoughts on Bella. She wouldn't be conscious for another 5 hours or so, but I still missed her face. I wanted to be with her, but I also believed my time was better served here, where I could do some good. I was imagining her smile when Brone interrupted me. Can I ask you something? I looked up at him in surprise. His eyes were on the waxing moon. It was partially obscured by cloud, as were the stars. Go ahead. Why do you do it? He whispered. Why feed off animals? I shrugged. Because I don't want to be a murderer. His head snapped to mine, and shock overtook his features. That's it. What did this guy want from me? Isn't that enough? Brone chuckled darkly. It wouldn't stop most vampires. Animal blood can be appealing, or more would surely drink it. It's not. Actually, it's mildly repulsive. I'd compare it to choosing sour milk over ice cream. You must have slipped up then, he concluded in disgust. Not since I came back to this life. Came back. I nodded. Honesty seemed like the best route to take with Brone. His opinion of me couldn't get any worse than it already was, after all. Not long after I was changed, I decided to take the more traditional path. I believed I was better than the others, because I could so easily pick off the murderers, rapists, and pedophiles within any given area. I was a vampire vigilante, and fed on creatures about as human as I was. They were monsters. It didn't take long for the guilt to set in though, I sighed, turning my face to Brone. He was staring straight at me, enthralled by my story, despite his opinion. I crawled back to my parents, and I haven't tasted human blood since except for Bella S, though she is still alive. Ah, so you feed off your girlfriend? No, but I did once have to suck venom from her bloodstream, I growled, overcome by the memory. She was attacked by a nomad. After he beat her to a pulp, he bit her. Luckily, my family and I got there just in time. Brone now looked completely flabbergasted, with his jaw hanging slightly, and his eyes wide like saucers. You killed your own? He questioned incredulously. For a human? Of course, I enunciated slowly, a little affronted. I'd kill anyone for trying to hurt Bella. His disbelieving expression. Don T looked so surprised. Who do you think took down the Washington newborn army last summer? That was you, he blurted. I nodded, before launching into the story. Throughout my recounting of the tale, I wished I could heard Brone's response. It would been nice to know how my family's history affected his attitude, if at all. His shield never lifted though. Silence followed as I drew to a close. The tension building between myself and my spying partner clashed with the serenity offered by the environment we were seated in. The breeze created a low musical chord as it rustled the grass and blew across the lily pond. The sound was complemented by the steady breathing of the sleepers and the occasional hooting of owls. Then there were other sounds weaving their way into the composition: the wings of bats, the scurrying of badgers and hedgehogs, the squeaking of field mice, the constant beating of 1,000 different hearts. Suddenly, a new sound echoed in my mind. A voice. It was Brone's. He was letting me in. I'd shared with him my horrors, now he would show me his. The last thing I'd ever expected was that the aura would lower his mental defenses. That, all things considered, left me nothing short of astounded. I could see in his thoughts why he needed this though. After everything I'd told him, he had concluded that I didn't deserve his animosity regardless of that fact. However, Brone would never be able to get past his hate of vampires. He would never be able to judge those good few amongst the world's undead populace by any other standard, because all he saw when he closed his eyes at night, the only image to ever fill his dreams, was that of his blood-stained lover, lying dead in their wedding bed, her creamy skin turned crimson, just like the eyes of her killer. Yes, I could understand his hatred, even more so when that picture burned the space behind my eyes. I could see it all from his perspective. No matter how much good I would achieve in my future years, I would always be one of them. I would always be his enemy, and for that, he was truly sorry. I understand, I murmured, closing my eyes. He nodded solemnly, before conjuring me a chair. I was grateful for this display of courtesy, and lifted myself from the ground to take my seat. Then, I listened silently as he took me back to the beginning of his tale, where his horror had started. We will continue in next part.